So I want you to picture the scene. It's late 2009, and the global economy is just, well, it's completely cratering.
Oh, yeah, just terrifying times, total chaos.
Exactly. We are in the absolute depths of the Great Recession. Like, no one even knows if the banking system is going to open its doors on Monday morning.
Right, it was that bad.
Yeah. And in the middle of all this sheer financial terror, there's this guy, our source material just calls him Jim, and he is driving around the streets of Omaha, Nebraska, but he's not alone.
He's in the passenger seat next to Warren Buffett, of all people.
Right. So outside the car windows, it looks like an economic wasteland. You know, stores are dark, small businesses have their windows boarded up, foreclosures everywhere.
Just literal devastation, trillions of dollars in wealth just evaporating.
Yeah, and Jim is staring at this, and he turns to Buffett, and he asks this desperate, agonizing question that was honestly on the mind of every single person on the planet right then. He goes, how does the economy ever bounce back from this?
And, you have to imagine the heavy silence in that car before Buffett answers. Because his response is just so completely sideways.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a joke. Right?
Totally. I mean, Buffett doesn't launch into some monologue about the Federal Reserve's balance sheet or, collateralized debt obligations.
No unemployment metrics, nothing like that.
Right. He just looks at Jim and asks a question of his own. He says, Jim, do you know what the best-selling candy bar was in 1962?
Which is just wild. And Jim is probably super bewildered, and he just goes, no.
And Buffett says, Snickers. And he asks, and do you know what the best-selling candy bar is today?
And Jim shakes his head again. No.
Buffett replies, Snickers. And then, and this is the best part, Buffett just lets the silence hang there. He doesn't explain it. He just goes back to driving.
See, I remember reading that the first time and thinking, honestly, that sounds like the detached arrogance of a billionaire.
Oh, it really does.
Like it sounds like you're asking about the weather while someone is screaming that their house is actively burning down.
Yeah, people are losing their life savings, and the Oracle of Omaha is giving a fun little trivia quiz about chocolate.
Exactly. It feels totally dismissive of the reality on the ground.
It absolutely reads that way, yeah, if you're only looking at the surface of the conversation. But the genius of Buffett, and really the entire premise of the philosophy we're going to tear apart today, lives inside that silence at the end of the exchange.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what was he actually doing there?
Well, he wasn't ignoring the fire. He was pointing Jim's attention to the foundation of the house, which wasn't burning at all. Buffett was showing him that while the macroeconomic environment had this apocalyptic collapse, human nature hadn't budged.
Right. The underlying behaviors and desires of a person walking into a corner store, they hadn't changed 1%. The Snickers bar is basically just a proxy for human nature.
Exactly, because if you're watching the news in 2009, all you see is unprecedented, terrifying change.
Just nonstop panic.
Right. But Buffett is forcing a pivot in perspective. He's saying, hey, look at what hasn't moved an inch. And that brings us exactly to what we're doing here today.
Yes, exactly. So if you're joining us on this deep dive, our mission today is to comprehensively unpack the introduction chapter of Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever, A Guide to What Never Changes.
Which is such a fantastic book.
It really is. And, in a world where you are constantly bombarded by a 247 news cycle, overnight AI disruptions, and just that exhausting pressure to keep up with every micro trend, we're going to explore the ultimate antidote today.
We really are. You're going to see why predicting the future is basically a fool's errand. But predicting human behavior, that is a guaranteed certainty.
Totally. We're going to break down how shifting your focus from what is changing to what never changes isn't just some calming psychological trick.
No, it's a massive competitive advantage.
Exactly. Whether you're building a business, managing a team, or frankly just trying to navigate life without a constant sense of vertigo.
And to really grasp the gravity of this shift in perspective, we have to look at how Housel anchors his argument right at the start.
Yeah, he doesn't start with modern economic theory, does he?
Not at all. He pulls from historians, psychologists, philosophers, because this tension between the illusion of change and the reality of permanence, it's been recognized by the sharpest minds for centuries.
Right, like he opens with that epigraph from the Enlightenment thinker Voltaire.
Yes. History never repeats itself. Man always does.
That is just such a sharp distinction. I mean, the specific events like the wars, the tech breakthroughs, the financial crashes, those are the novelties. They never happen the exact same way twice.
Right, the details always shift.
But the human reaction to those events, the panic, the greed, the tribalism, That's a closed loop. We just run the exact same emotional script over and over again, regardless of the era.
Which is exactly what Carl Jung argued. And Housel includes his perspective right alongside Voltaire's.
Pioneering psychologist, right?
Yeah. Jung pointed out that these identical psychological and physiological processes that governed humanity hundreds of thousands of years ago, they are the exact same processes operating in your brain right now.
Wow. So, like, when you face a stressful situation today, say a massive drop in your company's quarterly revenue, your body is basically reacting like a caveman.
Pretty much. Your body releases the exact same flood of cortisol. Your amygdala fires in the exact same pattern as a hunter-gatherer who suddenly realizes winter is coming and the food stores are empty.
That's crazy to think about. The external stimulus has evolved so much, but the internal machinery receiving it hasn't been updated in millennia.
Exactly. We are running Humanity 1.0 software on a Technology 100.0 hardware system.
I love that analogy. And this leads to what I think is maybe the most arresting framing in the entire introduction. It comes from the historian Neil Ferguson.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
It really is. He points out this staggering mathematical reality. The dead outnumber the living 14 to 1.
14 to 1. Let that sink in.
Right. For every single person walking the earth today, dealing with modern problems, there are 14 ghosts who have already lived, struggled, and died. And his warning is that if we ignore that massive accumulated data set of human experience, we really do so at our own peril.
It completely shatters the arrogance of the present moment, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. Think about how often you hear people in tech or business talk as if human history basically started with the invention of the iPhone.
Or the internet. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this inherent bias that because our tools are unprecedented, our problems must be unprecedented too.
Right, and so we assume the solutions have to be completely new. We discard the wisdom of the past because, well, we assume someone living in the 1800s couldn't possibly understand the complexities of a global supply chain or, like, a viral social media crisis.
But they absolutely understand the panic of a supply shortage or the mechanics of reputational destruction in a tight-knit community.
Yes, the scale is different, the speed is different, but the core human dynamic is completely identical.
I mean, if you understand how rumors destroyed a merchant's reputation in an 18th century coffee house in London, you completely understand how a coordinated cancellation campaign works on modern social media.
It's the exact same thing. The human desire for status, the fear of being ostracized,
Yeah.
the mob mentality, those are permanent variables.
And if you recognize that, you stop feeling so overwhelmed by the sheer volume of new information because you realize you've seen the underlying pattern before.
Which is the perfect bridge to the first major conceptual tool Housel gives us here. It's this thought experiment that makes the idea intensely practical. Let's call it the 500-year time travel test.
Yeah, it's a fun one. Housel asks you to imagine stepping into a time machine. You can go 500 years into the past, so we're talking, what's the early 1500s?
Yep, around 1524.
Right. Or you can jump 500 years into the future, landing somewhere in the 2500s.
And if you think about the immediate visceral reaction to that idea, it's just pure, terrifying disorientation. I mean, if I step out of a time machine in 1524, everything I rely on to make sense of the world is completely gone.
Oh, absolutely. The geopolitical map is unrecognizable.
Right. And medicine, it's basically centered around balancing your humors and, like, applying leeches.
The pinnacle of information technology is the printing press.
Exactly. Even if I landed in an English-speaking country, the dialect would be so incredibly difficult to parse.
And if you went 500 years into the future, it would probably be even worse.
Oh, 100%. I can't even begin to fathom the energy sources or the transportation or how humans might have integrated with artificial intelligence. I'd feel like a total alien on my own planet.
You would be utterly lost.
Hmm.
But Housel argues, and this is the crux of the whole experiment, you would only be lost for about 10 minutes.
Wait, really? Only 10 minutes?
Yeah, because the moment you stop staring at the crazy architecture, the strange clothes, and the baffling technology, and you started actually observing how the people were interacting with each other, you would instantly know exactly how to navigate that world.
Ah, because you'd immediately start recognizing the social dynamics.
Precisely. You would see someone trying to impress a potential mate with a display of wealth or status.
Right.
You'd see a politician or a tribal leader manipulating a crowd by appealing to their deepest fears of the other.
Yes, the classic us versus them.
Exactly. You'd witness people making terribly irrational decisions driven by sudden greed, and you'd see them paralyzed by sudden panic.
It's just human nature playing out.
Yeah, you would see overconfidence leading someone to disaster. Whether they are trading spices on a wooden ship in the 1500s, trading derivatives on Wall Street today, or trading whatever digital currency exists in the 2500s, the human motivations driving the trades are completely identical.
That is, wow. Let's make this really concrete for you listening right now, because it's easy to just nod along to this philosophically. Think about the massive asset bubbles we've seen recently.
The crypto boom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you were trying to understand the frenzy around NFTs or certain cryptocurrencies a few years ago, you could have read 1,000 white papers on blockchain tech, cryptography, decentralized finance, all of it.
You could spend months trying to master the novel technology.
But none of that would have helped you understand why people were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on pictures of digital apes.
No, the tech doesn't explain the irrational behavior.
Right. However, if you had read a single chapter on the Dutch tulip mania of the 1630s, you would have understood the entire phenomenon perfectly.
Oh, that is such a good comparison.
You would understand the social contagion, the fear of missing out, the sudden influx of irrational retail investment, and the inevitable catastrophic crash. The technology of the blockchain was utterly novel, but the psychology of the bubble, that was 500 years old.
And this is exactly how we apply the 500-year rule to our own lives and decision-making today. When we face a massive technological or societal shift, whether it's generative AI, a new regulatory environment, or a shift in global power dynamics, our instinct is always to obsess over the novel details.
We try to become experts in the new terrain.
Right. But Housel is suggesting that our time is far better spent mastering the constants. If you want to know how humans will react to AI over the next 20 years, study how they reacted to the Industrial Revolution.
Study the Luddites.
Yes, study the initial panic, the disruption of labor, the eventual adaptation, and the creation of entirely new categories of work. The historical details won't perfectly map to the future, but the emotional trajectory of the human race absolutely will.
Okay, I want to push back on this slightly, or at least, explore the friction here, because I know what a lot of people listening are probably thinking.
Sure, let's hear it.
It sounds super comforting to say, just study history, humans never change. But in the actual trenches of running a business or managing a career, ignoring technological change gets you killed.
Well, yes, of course.
Right. We all know the classic business school parables. Kodak ignored the shift to digital cameras. Blockbuster ignored the shift to streaming. If you're an executive or an entrepreneur and you just sit back and say, well, human nature never changes. People always want entertainment, so I'm just going to keep renting out VHS tapes, you are going to go bankrupt.
Oh, totally.
So how does this philosophy not just lead to massive, fatal complacency?
That is the exact trap. And it's why understanding the mechanism behind Housel's philosophy is so important.
Yeah.
He is not advocating for ignoring innovation at all.
Okay, so what is he advocating for?
He is advocating for a radical shift in how you direct your innovation.
Right.
You do not anchor your business model or your career to the delivery mechanism. You anchor it to the underlying permanent human desire.
Ah, I see.
And the source text actually gives us arguably the most successful masterclass in this exact distinction: Amazon and the philosophy of Jeff Bezos.
Oh, the famous Bezos question. This completely flips the standard visionary narrative on its head.
It really does. Bezos used to talk about how he was constantly hounded by reporters, Wall Street analysts, other CEOs, and they all asked him the exact same question. Jeff, what's going to change in the next 10 years?
It is the quintessential Silicon Valley question. Everyone wants to peer around the corner and predict the next big disruption.
Right. They want to know if it's VR or crypto or drones.
Yeah.
They want the prediction of the event. But Bezos noted that almost no one ever asked him the corollary question, which he argued was infinitely more important.
Which is?
What is not going to change in the next 10 years?
Wow.
And the reason Bezos build a sustainable, durable business strategy on the shifting sands of what might change. You can't sink billions of dollars of capital into a guess about consumer behavior in 2035.
No, you have to build your foundation on bedrock. You have to build it on the permanent desires.
Exactly. And Bezos articulated exactly what that bedrock was for Amazon. Yeah. He said, and I'm paraphrasing from the text here, that it is literally impossible to imagine a scenario 10 years in the future where an Amazon customer walks up to him and says, Jeff, I love Amazon. I just really wish the prices were a little higher.
Right. Or, I love Amazon. The selection is great. I just wish my packages arrived a bit slower.
Exactly. The desire for low prices, the desire for massive selection, and the desire for fast, frictionless delivery. Those are permanent fixtures of human psychology.
So because Bezos identified those non-changing desires, It gave him the supreme confidence to deploy capital at a scale that completely terrified his competitors.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
He could spend billions building a labyrinth of fulfillment centers, buying fleets of cargo planes, developing advanced robotics,
Yeah.
because he knew that even if the technology changed completely, even if we go from delivery vans to autonomous drones, the infrastructure he was building served a permanent need.
He wasn't guessing, he was investing in a certainty. So, to go back to the blockbuster pushback I brought up earlier, Blockbuster didn't fail because human desires changed. Humans in 2010 wanted Friday night entertainment just as much as humans in 1990 did.
Right, the desire was identical.
Blockbuster failed because they confused the delivery mechanism, the physical plastic VHS tape or DVD in a brick-and-mortar store, with the actual desire. They protected the tape.
While Netflix recognized that the permanent human desire was actually frictionless access to stories,
Exactly. Netflix disrupted the mechanism to better serve the permanent desire.
that's a crucial distinction. Let's elevate this beyond retail too, because if you're a seasoned executive listening to this right now, you aren't just thinking about consumer goods. Let's look at B2B services or enterprise software or even internal corporate leadership.
Okay, what's the equivalent of fast shipping in a massive B2B contract?
It's trust. It's reliability. It's the mitigation of risk for the person signing the contract. The software you are selling might be completely revolutionized by machine learning in the next 3 years, but the chief information officer buying your software will always want a vendor they can trust implicitly.
Someone who won't get them fired if something breaks.
Exactly. If you anchor your company culture and your sales strategy to the permanent human need for trust and reliability, the technological changes in your product line become features, not existential threats.
Man, I want to translate this to the individual listener too. Imagine you are auditing your own career trajectory right now. Are you building your career around a delivery mechanism or a permanent need?
That is the big question.
If you're a graphic designer and your entire identity and value proposition is tied to knowing the exact keyboard shortcuts for Adobe Illustrator, well, you are incredibly vulnerable to an AI tool that can bypass that software. You are anchored to a tape.
Yep, you were Blockbuster in that scenario.
But if your value proposition is your deep understanding of human visual psychology, knowing how color, typography, and negative space can manipulate a viewer's emotional state and drive a purchasing decision, you are anchored to a permanent truth.
The AI just becomes your delivery van, but you still own the understanding of the human craving.
Exactly. You have to find your own personal Snickers bar or your own fast shipping.
Which naturally brings us to the profound humility required to actually execute this philosophy. Because once you accept that human nature is permanent, while the external environment is chaotically unpredictable, it drastically changes what you even attempt to forecast.
Oh, for sure. And Housel is remarkably candid about this in the introduction. Here's a guy who has spent his entire career analyzing markets, and he flatly states, I have absolutely no idea what the stock market is going to do next year.
He says, I don't know who is going to win the next election. I cannot tell you what specific company or even what sector will dominate the global economy a decade from now.
It is so incredibly refreshing to hear a recognized expert just admit, I have zero clue what the specific events of tomorrow will be. We are so conditioned by talking heads on financial networks and political pundits who speak with this absolute manufactured certainty about what the S&P 500 will do by Q3 or exactly how a geopolitical conflict will resolve.
But Housel's saying that predicting specific events is a delusion.
It really is.
It's a delusion driven by our deep psychological discomfort with uncertainty. Humans crave narrative and control. We want someone to tell us exactly what is going to happen so we can feel safe.
Right.
But the world is infinitely complex. An event like a market crash or a pandemic or a war is the result of millions of cascading variables colliding in ways that are mathematically impossible to model.
But then Housel immediately follows his admission of ignorance with the declaration of absolute certainty.
Yes, he does. He says, while I cannot predict the events, I can confidently predict the behaviors.
That is the pivotal pivot, predicting behaviors instead of predicting events.
Right. He can't tell you the date of the next market crash or what specific catalyst will trigger it. It might be a sovereign debt default. It might be a cyber attack. It could be an algorithmic flash crash. The event is a total mystery. But he can predict with 100% certainty exactly how people will behave when that crash happens.
Because they always behave the same way.
Exactly. He knows people will panic. He knows they will extrapolate the immediate pain into the indefinite future. He knows they will sell at the exact wrong moment out of pure fear.
And on the flip side, He can confidently predict that during a massive bull market, people will succumb to greed.
Right. They will leverage themselves to the hilt and convince themselves that the good times are a permanent new paradigm. He knows that business leaders who achieve massive success will eventually let their egos take over, they'll become complacent, and they'll create the exact conditions for their own disruption.
It's like trying to predict exactly which specific tree in a massive million-acre forest is going to be struck by lightning during a storm.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, you could spend millions of dollars on atmospheric sensors and you still wouldn't be able to predict the exact tree. That is trying to predict an event. It's a waste of resources. But predicting that lightning will strike somewhere in that forest and that the dry underbrush will catch fire, that is a certainty. That is predicting behavior.
And how does that change your preparation? If you are obsessed with predicting the tree, you just run around the forest trying to stand in the right spot, which is exhausting and futile.
You'd go crazy.
But if you predict the behavior of the fire, you build fire breaks. You clear the brush around your own house, you buy insurance, you prepare your environment to withstand the inevitable behavior of the system, regardless of where the specific spark originates.
So, practically speaking, for anyone listening who is managing a portfolio or a business, or honestly even just their own household budget, stop exhausting yourself trying to time the specific events.
You cannot time the market.
You cannot predict the exact month a recession will force your clients to cut their budgets. But you can look at the behavioral certainty. You know a recession will happen eventually. You know clients will panic and cut spending.
So you build a fire break.
Exactly. You maintain 6 months of runway in cash. You build deep, unshakable relationships with your key clients so you aren't the first line item cut. You prepare your own emotional regulation so that when everyone else in your industry is panicking and making rash decisions, you can remain completely stoic.
And actually look for the opportunities that their panic is creating.
Exactly.
This concept of building robust systems that survive unpredictability is elevated to a really fascinating philosophical level when Housel introduces an idea from Naval Ravikant. This is where the text moves from just managing risk to fundamentally rethinking how we define success and skill.
Ah, yes. The 1,000 parallel universes test.
Let's call it that, yeah.
This was the part of the introduction that completely stopped me in my tracks. It forces such a brutal audit of how we achieve whatever success we currently have. Walk us through exactly what Ravikant is proposing here and how someone actually applies it.
Sure. So Ravikant sets up this mental model. Imagine your life is playing out simultaneously in 1,000 parallel universes. Every possible variation of economic conditions, technological trends, and random chance is distributed across these universes.
Okay.
Ravikant says, you want to be wealthy in 999 of them. You don't want to be wealthy in the 50 of them where you got lucky, so we want to factor luck out of it. He wants to live, work, and invest in such a way that his success is a near mathematical certainty across the multiverse, not just a fluke of a specific timeline.
Okay, but let's really drill down into the mechanics of this, because factoring out luck sounds great on a bumper sticker, but it is incredibly difficult to do in reality. How do you distinguish between a genuine universal skill and a lucky trait that is just perfectly suited for this specific universe at this specific time?
You have to ruthlessly audit the dependencies of your success. Let's look at a hyper-specific example. Let's say it's 2021, and you start an agency that specifically creates marketing campaigns for obscure, decentralized finance protocols.
Okay, very niche.
Right. Interest rates are at zero, venture capital money is flooding the zone, and everyone is absolutely euphoric. You make $5 million in 18 months, you feel like an absolute genius.
I mean, who wouldn't?
But apply the 1,000 universes test. In how many universes does that exact combination of zero interest rate euphoria, unregulated crypto frenzy, and specific cultural timing actually exist?
Wow, maybe 10. Maybe 15 out of 1,000. In the other 985 universes, the regulatory hammer comes down early, or the Fed raises rates, the VC money dries up, and your hyper-niche agency goes completely bankrupt in month 3?
Exactly. Your success was almost entirely dependent on a fragile, non-repeatable convergence of external events. You got lucky in this specific universe. Now, contrast that with a different approach. Let's say instead of focusing purely on the niche mechanics of crypto, you obsessively studied human persuasion.
Okay, a much broader skill.
Yeah. You learned how to craft a narrative that builds deep trust. You learned how to manage cash flow conservatively, always assuming winter is coming. You learned how to hire and retain talent by treating people with profound respect.
If you build a business on those pillars, it honestly doesn't matter what universe you drop into.
Right. You drop that person into a universe where the internet was never invented,
Mm.
and it's 1950, and they build a massive, highly successful manufacturing company. You drop them into a universe where the economy is in a permanent depression, and they build a lean, indispensable service business that survives because their clients trust them implicitly.
The specific industry might change. The massive wealth spikes might not be as dramatic, but they are highly successful in 999 universes out of 1,000.
Exactly. They have factored out the luck of timing and trends and relied entirely on the permanent little laws of human interaction.
So the challenge for you, listening right now and analyzing your own life through this lens, is to look at your income, your career trajectory, and your social standing, and ask the really uncomfortable question: how fragile is this?
Am I successful right now because I happen to be surfing a wave that I did not create and cannot control?
Yes. If the wave breaks, do I have the ability to swim? It requires a total ego death, really. You have to admit that a lot of your current standing might just be circumstantial.
But once you admit that, you can start aggressively transitioning your energy away from studying the temporary waves and towards studying the fluid dynamics of the water itself.
And that transition is exactly what Housel is trying to facilitate with this book. This introduction we've been tearing apart is really just the preamble. It sets the stage for a collection of 23 short stories, each one isolating a specific, timeless current of human behavior that passes the 1,000 universes test.
We obviously don't have time to dive deep into all 23 today, but just scanning the concepts he outlines really crystallizes everything we've been discussing. For instance, he explores the idea that risk is what you don't see.
That is a fundamental behavioral truth. We spend all our time modeling the risks we can imagine, the known unknowns.
But the catastrophic risks, the ones that actually wipe out portfolios and empires, are always the things no one was talking about the day before they happened. The 1929 crash, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, the pandemic. The permanent truth is that true risk is always invisible until the moment of impact.
Or the psychological truth he explores. The first rule of happiness is low expectations. That is something a Stoic philosopher in ancient Rome understood, and it's something a modern neuroscientist understands.
The objective reality of your wealth or success barely matters.
Right. Your subjective experience of reality is purely dictated by the gap between what you have and what you expect it to have.
He also explores how the best story wins. We love to believe we are rational creatures who make decisions based on empirical data and optimized spreadsheets.
But the permanent truth across all 1,000 universes is that logic rarely changes behavior. The person, the politician, or the company that can tell the most resonant, emotionally compelling narrative will almost always defeat the person with the most accurate data. And my personal favorite, the cycle of history. Calm plants the seeds of crazy.
Oh, that's such a good one.
Prolonged periods of economic stability and peace actually create the psychological conditions for instability.
Yeah.
Because things are calm, people assume risk has vanished. Because they assume risk has vanished, they take on massive leverage and make reckless decisions.
And those reckless decisions are exactly what caused the next chaotic crash. It is an endless, unbreakable behavioral loop.
Okay, so what does this all mean? When you step back and look at the architecture of everything we've discussed today, Warren Buffett sitting in silence in 2009, the bizarre experience of stepping out of a time machine in the 1500s, Jeff Bezos pouring capital into permanent desires, and Naval Ravikant auditing his parallel lives, a singular, incredibly profound synthesis emerges.
We are a society that is addicted to the future. We are exhausted, running on an ever-accelerating treadmill, desperately trying to map the shifting terrain of tomorrow. We live in a state of chronic, low-grade anxiety because we feel ignorant of what is coming next.
We feel like we are constantly playing defense against a world that is changing faster than we can comprehend.
Exactly. But the soul of Housel's message is that true wisdom, unshakable peace of mind, and the ultimate strategic advantage come from recognizing the illusion. Beneath the terrifying, chaotic surface of technological disruption, political upheaval, and economic volatility, the deep currents of human nature are absolutely silent.
And exactly the same as they ever were.
The water on the surface is churning, but the depths are perfectly still. If you learn to read those deep currents, if you study how humans react to fear, how they desire status, how they crave connection, and how they respond to incentives, you will never be truly caught off guard by the future again. The props on the stage will change, the costumes will change, but the script of the play is already written.
That is a staggering realization to sit with. So, I want to leave you with a tangible thought to carry with you today. I want you to isolate your biggest source of professional or personal anxiety right now. Maybe it's the fear that an algorithm is going to render your skill set obsolete. Maybe you are staring at the macroeconomic data and terrified about the stability of your business. Or maybe it's something deeply personal, a massive shift in a relationship or a community you belong to. Look directly at that anxiety and ask yourself, how much of this fear is generated by my obsession with the novel event, the new technology, the new data point, the changing circumstance?
And how much of that terrifying anxiety would immediately evaporate if you realized that the underlying human motivations, the need for security, the desire for belonging, the fear of loss driving this entire situation are the exact same motivations that have been playing out for 500 years?
The tools in our hands are breathtakingly new, but the humans holding them are exactly the same. When you focus on the permanent human, the terrifying changes in the tools lose their power over you.
It completely reframes how you interact with the world. You stop reacting to the noise and start operating on the signal.
It changes everything. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack this incredible perspective today. But our exploration of these permanent truths is far from over. Because if you think understanding the immovable nature of human psychology gives you a perfect map of the world, you also need to reckon with how fragile the events of history truly are. Next time, we are going to explore a terrifying but fascinating paradox, how the most massive, world-altering changes in history often hung by an invisible thread, and how a random puff of wind, a delayed train, or a split-second decision can completely alter the fate of entire nations. You absolutely will not want to miss it.
Humans are actually incredibly good at predicting the future. I mean, we really are, except for the surprises. And the problem is, the surprises are literally the only things that actually matter.
Yeah, that is the brutal truth of it. We spend so much of our lives obsessing over these detailed forecasts, but the events that fundamentally alter our lives are the ones that were on absolutely nobody's radar.
Right. Until the exact moment they happen. Usually when we talk about planning for the future, whether that's in corporate strategy or personal finance or really just navigating life, there is this underlying expectation of precision. We treat the future like it's like an engineering problem.
Oh, absolutely, like a math equation to be solved.
Exactly. You map out the variables, you build this sophisticated statistical model, you look at the historical data, and you point to this beautifully crafted blueprint and say, there it is. That's exactly what's going to happen in Q3.
And we desperately want to believe that blueprint. It's binary, it's clean. We have a profound psychological need for things to be visible and categorized. It is deeply, almost neurologically comforting to look at a complex Excel spreadsheet and feel like the chaos of tomorrow has been wrangled into submission.
But then you step out of the boardroom, right? You step into the real world of business and entrepreneurship, and suddenly that beautiful blueprint is completely useless.
It's worse than useless, honestly, because it gives you a false sense of security.
Yeah, exactly. The landscape isn't a grid. It's incredibly murky. So today we are exploring Chapter 2 of Morgan Housel's work. The chapter is called Risk is What You Don't See. You're going to learn why the most dangerous threats in your business, your investments, and your life are the ones your imagination literally can't even fathom right now.
And more importantly, we're going to talk about why shifting your entire focus from prediction to preparedness is the ultimate competitive advantage.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we are living in a culture that is utterly obsessed with flawed predictions, and we need a fundamentally better way to navigate the unknown.
That is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to dismantle this illusion of total control that so many professionals cling to. We're going to build a mental framework for enduring the unexpected.
And we've got some amazing historical anecdotes from the source material to help us do that.
We do. And the goal here isn't to somehow become psychic, and get better at predicting the unpredictable. That's a fool's errand. The goal is to build a personal and operational system that is robust enough to survive the blow you never saw coming.
Which brings us to a massive misconception in corporate culture and really just human nature in general. There is this pervasive belief that if you just plan hard enough, if you hire enough consultants and draft enough contingency plans, you can effectively eliminate risk.
Yeah, people treat risk like dirt on the floor. Like if you vacuum long enough, it's just gone.
Right. But Morgan Housel makes this profound point. He says that no matter how intensely an organization plans for failure, Risk is simply what is left over after you think you've thought of absolutely everything.
It is the ultimate blind spot. It's not the variable you miscalculated, it's the variable that wasn't included in the equation to begin with because no one in the room even knew it existed.
And to really drive this home, the source material provides this chilling, incredibly concrete example. Let me set the scene for you. We have to go back to May 4, 1961. This is the absolute height of the space race.
The stakes could not have been higher.
Exactly. NASA is developing its new spacesuits. And before they can confidently strap astronauts to the top of explosive rockets and send them into orbit, they need to run extreme pressure and altitude tests. So they initiate Project Stratolab.
Right, this wasn't a rocket, it was a balloon.
Yes, a massive high-altitude hot air balloon. They put a naval medical officer named Victor Praser, along with another pilot, into the gondola of this balloon, and they send them up to 113,720 feet.
Just to put that into perspective for you, commercial airliners cruise at around 35,000 feet. At 113,000 feet, you are literally scraping the absolute edge of space.
It's basically space.
Yeah, the atmosphere is so thin that if your suit depressurizes, your blood will literally begin to boil. The margin for error is absolutely zero.
Right. It is one of the most hostile environments a human being can possibly experience.
Yeah.
And yet the flight is a total undeniable success. The engineering holds up perfectly.
They proved the suit worked.
Exactly. Prather's suit works beautifully in the harshest conditions imaginable. They conduct their tests, and they begin the long descent back to Earth. Now, you can imagine the psychological relief Prather must have felt.
The adrenaline crash must have been intense.
The monumental task is done. They land safely in the ocean, precisely as planned. A rescue helicopter is hovering right there, immediately ready to hoist them to safety. And because they are finally low enough in the atmosphere for him to breathe on his own, Prather opens the faceplate on his helmet.
Which is such a natural human reaction.
Right. He just wants to catch a breath of fresh ocean air after being sealed in that suit for hours.
And this raises an important question about human psychology when we think we are safe. Prather had survived the vacuum of space. The edge of the atmosphere was conquered. But as he is standing on the pontoon of the gondola, connecting himself to the helicopter's rescue line, he slips.
He just slips.
Yeah, he falls backward into the ocean. Now, theoretically, this shouldn't have been a fatal disaster. The spacesuit was specifically designed to be watertight and highly buoyant. If he falls in, he just bobs on the surface until they grab him.
But his faceplate was open.
Exactly. Because he had opened his faceplate for that completely mundane breath of fresh air, the protective seal was broken. Water immediately rushed into the suit, it lost its buoyancy, it pulled him under, and Victor Prather drowned.
It is just a devastating, haunting story. You survive the edge of space, only to drown on the surface of the ocean because of an open visor. But I have to ask, how does an organization like NASA let this happen? I mean, NASA is arguably the most planning-centric, obsessive, detail-oriented organization in human history. They map out the physics of everything.
What's fascinating here is that NASA's culture of extreme planning actually highlights the terrifying nature of unseen risk. You're right, they don't send people to the edge of space by crossing their fingers.
No, they have armies of engineers.
Exactly. They have thousands of the most brilliant engineering minds on Earth mapping out every conceivable mechanical failure. They have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C for every oxygen valve, every pressure sensor, every altimeter.
And yet it wasn't the altimeter that got him.
No. Despite millions of dollars and thousands of minds focused entirely on risk mitigation and unimaginably tiny, thoroughly human detail, just wanting a breath of fresh air upon splashdown invited absolute catastrophe. They planned for the complex technical failures, but they couldn't plan for the mundane human reflex.
It's like a company building an impenetrable digital firewall. Imagine you're a CEO, and you spend $10 million on cybersecurity. You hire the absolute best ethical hackers to penetration test your networks. You mandate multi-factor authentication. You put biometric retinal scanners on all the server room doors.
You're completely locked down.
Right. You're mathematically secure from a remote Russian hacking syndicate. But then, this is a hot Tuesday afternoon. The air conditioning is acting up. And the night shift janitor props open the physical server room door with a brick to get some cross breeze.
And someone walks right off the street.
Someone walks right off the street and unplugs a rack. You planned for the highly sophisticated, mathematically complex attack, but the unseen, totally mundane brick is what actually destroys your business.
That analogy perfectly captures the essence of this chapter. You fortified the front door, the windows, the roof, and you feel incredibly secure in your fortress. but you didn't even conceive of the brick. This brings us to a foundational quote from financial advisor Carl Richards that Morgan Housel highlights in the book. He says, "Risk is what's left over after you think you've thought of everything."
I really want you, the listener, to let that sink in. Risk isn't the thing you are currently stressing over. The thing you are stressing over, whether that's inflation, a specific competitor, a known supply chain bottleneck, is, by definition, something you are actively managing.
Precisely. If you can see it, you can price it. You can buy an insurance policy against it. You can build a redundant supply chain. You can hire a crisis PR firm.
Because you know it's there.
Right. Because you can act on it. Its danger to your absolute survival is inherently limited. The real danger, the true definition of existential risk, is the remainder. It is the leftover. It is the slip on the rescue line.
But that raises a massive problem. If Victor Prather's death or the collapse of a massive business is caused by something entirely unimaginable, why do we constantly read history books or business case studies that make past disasters seem completely, blindingly obvious?
Oh, the 2020 hindsight.
Yeah. We look backward and think, well, I would have seen that coming.
And that arrogant assumption is perhaps the most dangerous cognitive bias we possess. It's called hindsight bias, and it creates this seductive myth of inevitability.
Right.
Our brains absolutely despise chaos. So when an unpredictable disaster happens, a market crash, a global pandemic, a sudden war, our brains retroactively scour the past for clues, stitch them together into a neat linear narrative, and convince us that the disaster was entirely predictable.
Which then gives us this completely false, incredibly dangerous confidence that we will easily spot the next big disaster before it hits.
Exactly. We think we figured out the code.
I want to dive into exactly how delusional we are about this, because the source material absolutely demolishes this idea by looking at the economic blindness surrounding the Great Depression. Okay, think about the Roaring '20s.
Flappers, jazz, the booming stock market.
Right, it's a time of unprecedented economic boom, massive speculation, incredible wealth generation. Then we get to October 1929. Just before the absolute peak of history's craziest stock bubble, right on the eve of the devastating crash, you have this incredibly famous, highly respected economist named Irving Fisher.
A very prominent figure.
A giant in his field.
Yeah.
And he literally tells an audience that stock prices have reached what looks like a permanently high plateau.
Now, today, we look at that quote in our history books and we laugh. It sounds absurd. It sounds almost comedic.
Is it the ultimate famously wrong prediction?
It is. We think, how could someone with a PhD, someone so brilliant, be so utterly blind to something so structurally inevitable? Because according to the conventional wisdom of market cycles that we all accept today, the crazier the boom, the harder the bust.
Therefore, the Great Depression must have been glaringly obvious to anyone paying even a little bit of attention.
That's what we tell ourselves.
But wait, wasn't there anyone sounding the alarm? I mean, surely, just like we have contrarian investors today, there must have been the 1920s equivalent of the big short guys who saw the whole system was rotting.
Well, the author includes this brilliant observation from Nobel laureate Robert Shiller to answer exactly that. When Shiller was asked to name the economists or financial experts who actually predicted a decade-long Great Depression, his answer was staggering.
What did he say?
He said, 0. Nobody.
Wow, literally nobody.
Nobody. Now, sure, some people said the stock market was getting a bit overpriced and might correct. That always happens. But nobody predicted the utter systemic devastation, the massive bank failures, the decade of grinding poverty that followed. The magnitude of the event was entirely unseen.
So what does this all mean? Are we just totally delusional? Because if you want the ultimate jaw-dropping data point to prove just how blind the experts are in the moment, look at the 1930 poll from the National Economic League. I could not believe this when I read it.
It's a shocking statistic.
Now, for context, 1930 is a full year into the Great Depression. The stock market has already crashed, breadlines are forming, people are suffering immensely. But when you ask these highly educated, well-informed economic experts what the biggest problems facing the United States are, what do they say?
You would assume the collapse of the financial system would be number one.
You would, you really would. But here are their answers. Number 1, the administration of justice. Number 2, prohibition. Number 3, disrespect for law. Number 4, crime.
It's all about crime and alcohol.
Right. They're obsessed with bootlegging.
Yeah.
And where was unemployment on that list of urgent national crises? 18th.
18th. That is wild.
A full year into the Great Depression, unemployment, the defining tragedy of the era, was the 18th biggest concern for the experts. Even in 1931, 2 full years into the disaster, it had only moved up to fourth place.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals the terrifying essence of unseen risk. The defining tragedy of an entire generation was actively unfolding all around them. It was tearing the economic fabric of society apart in real time.
People were literally losing their homes.
Right, yet the leading economic minds were still largely focused on bootleggers and Al Capone. Why? Because the Great Depression was entirely unprecedented in their mental models. They didn't have a category for total systemic failure, so they literally couldn't perceive the magnitude of what was happening right in front of their eyes.
But surely today is different, right? With algorithmic data scraping, real-time global economic monitoring, thousands of analysts on Twitter, wouldn't we see a massive crisis coming today?
It's a comforting thought, but the answer is a resounding no. Our technology has improved, but our human psychology hasn't changed an inch. The author draws a brilliant modern connection to The Economist magazine.
Oh.
Now, to be clear, The Economist is arguably one of the most revered, intellectually rigorous publications for global forecasting and geopolitical analysis in the world.
Absolutely. It's required reading for world leaders, CEOs, hedge fund managers.
Yet, if you look at their January 2020 year-ahead issue, an entire magazine dedicated to predicting the most important trends of the coming year, there are zero mentions of COVID-19. None.
January 2020.
Right. And if you look at their January 2022 year-ahead issue, there are zero mentions of Russia invading Ukraine.
And as the author points out, this is absolutely not a criticism of the magazine's journalists or their intelligence.
Not at all. It actually proves the fundamental thesis. The biggest risks are always unseen. The events that completely reshape the global economy, the events that dictate supply chains, inflation rates, and geopolitical stability are precisely the ones that are totally absent from the major forecasting models just months before they occur.
So as a listener, sitting there trying to plan your career or build a business strategy, what do you actually do with this information? If the experts can't see the Great Depression and the best magazines can't see a global pandemic, are business forecasts entirely useless? Should we just throw our hands up?
It means we have to radically change the questions we ask. When you go to an industry conference and ask an expert panel, what is the biggest risk in the market right now? That is functionally equivalent to asking, what do you expect to be surprised about?
Which makes no sense.
It's an oxymoron. It's a logical fallacy.
Right, because the very act of observing and acting on a risk defangs it. If the whole market knows about a risk, the market adjusts.
Exactly. If everyone knows a recession is coming, businesses cut costs, the Fed adjusts rates, investors hedge their portfolios, and the systemic shock is neutralized.
The blow is softened.
Right. So the practical takeaway for you is this. You have to stop relying on economic or business forecasts as if they are maps of the future. Most forecasts only predict slight variations of what is already happening.
Like, we expect a 2% bump.
Yeah. A forecast that says inflation will be slightly higher or Q4 growth will be slightly slower is just taking today's reality and nudging it a few degrees to the left or right. It feels safe. But the biggest news story of the next 10 years, the single event that will dictate the ultimate success or failure of your long-term strategies, will be something absolutely no one is talking about today.
Which is terrifying, but also, in a weird way, incredibly liberating. It frees you from the anxiety of trying to consume every single piece of predictive data on CNBC or Bloomberg. You don't have to feel guilty for not reading the tea leaves correctly because there are no tea leaves for the things that actually matter.
That's a great way to put it.
Which leads perfectly into a really profound point Morgan Housel makes about our blindness in the present moment. We really do have this incredibly limited microscopic view of reality. He brings up this great historical anecdote about Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1941.
I love this story.
So FDR sitting in his office, his presidential library is opening up, and he's just chuckling to himself. A reporter asks him why he's so cheerful, and FDR basically says, "I'm thinking of all the historians who will come here in the future, digging through all these filed documents, thinking they'll actually find the answers to their questions."
FDR understood the profound incompleteness of the historical record. He knew firsthand, as the man making the decisions, how many massive, world-altering choices were made in hushed, undocumented conversations in a hallway.
Or over a quick phone call.
Exactly. He knew how many decisions were driven by unspoken personal motives, fatigue, or based on vanishing contexts that would never ever make it into a filed, stamped government document.
History only knows what was photographed, what was officially recorded, or what was spoken in an interview by someone who actually agreed to be interviewed. That is a microscopic fraction of reality.
This raises an important question. If our understanding of the past, where we supposedly have all the archives and the benefit of hindsight, is that fragmented and flawed, imagine how completely incomplete our perception of the present is, where we lack even the benefit of hindsight to stitch the fragments together.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle where you only have three pieces,
Yeah.
you don't have the picture on the box.
That's exactly it.
To really make us feel this blindness, the author uses this poignant, almost heartbreaking analogy. Picture a 3-year-old child playing with their toys in the sun on the living room floor.
Okay.
As far as that child is concerned, their world is entirely perfect and complete. They have mom, dad, a sandwich, and their blocks. They are completely, blissfully oblivious to the fact that geopolitics exist, that the Federal Reserve is adjusting interest rates which might cost their parents their home, or that there is a risk of terminal illness in the world. Their reality is strictly bounded by their immediate sensory perception.
And here is the deeply humbling part for all of us high-functioning professionals. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman says that adults are fundamentally no different from that 3-year-old.
Really? How so?
Kahneman has this concept called WYSIOD. What you see is all there is. He points out that the idea that what we don't see might actually refute everything we currently believe just doesn't naturally occur to us.
We just assume we have the whole picture.
Exactly. We build a coherent narrative about our industry, our marriage, our health, based only on the tiny sliver of information we happen to have access to, and we arrogantly mistake that narrative for absolute truth.
We are all just 3-year-olds playing in the sun, utterly convinced we have the whole picture. And Morgan Housel provides this powerful, haunting illustration of this from the morning of September 11, 2001.
Yeah, this part is heavy.
It is. He highlights a local New York City newscast from that exact morning, just minutes before the first plane hit. The local anchor is on screen smiling, saying, "Good morning, it's going to be a beautiful day today, sunshine throughout. Really a splendid September day."
It sends shivers down your spine to hear that audio now. But what's fascinating here is what it reveals about human psychology. Our daily peace of mind practically relies on this kind of blissful ignorance.
We have to believe it.
We have to believe it's just going to be a splendid September day. If we were constantly acutely aware of all the unseen risks swirling around us, the microscopic pathogens, the geopolitical tensions, the mechanical flaws in the infrastructure we rely on, we would be entirely paralyzed by anxiety. We literally wouldn't be able to function or get out of bed.
So on a personal, emotional level, that ignorance is a necessary defense mechanism.
Yeah.
But here's the critical pivot. While that ignorance might be necessary for our mental health, in the context of business, entrepreneurship, and investing, it is a massive critical vulnerability.
It is the absolute Achilles heel of the modern executive. When you confuse your limited perception for the total reality of the market, you become fragile.
Okay, so let's translate this into a practical takeaway.
Yeah.
I am sufficiently terrified. We can't predict the future. Our memories of the past are flawed, and we are blind to the present. What on earth do we actually do?
Yeah.
How do we operate a business or manage a portfolio in a world this inherently chaotic?
We have to shift our entire operating paradigm. We have to move from the arrogance of prediction to the humility of preparedness.
Preparedness over prediction.
Yes. And the most concrete, brilliant example of this is how the state of California handles earthquakes. Let's look at the earthquake model.
Right.
California knows with absolute undeniable geological certainty that a massive earthquake, the big one, will hit. The tectonic plates guarantee it. But they do not know when it will happen, they do not know exactly where the epicenter will be, and they do not know exactly what magnitude it will be.
Right, they cannot forecast it. It could be tomorrow, it could be in 30 years.
Exactly. So do they sit around waiting for a seismologist to give them a specific date, time, and zip code before they take action? Do they say, well, the forecast says no earthquake this quarter, so let's not worry about it? No. They design their buildings to withstand violent shaking, regardless of when it happens.
They change the building code.
Exactly. They build flexibility into the infrastructure using base isolators. They constantly train their emergency response crews for a disaster that has absolutely no scheduled arrival date.
They don't invest their resources in predicting the exact nature of the shock. They invest in surviving any shock.
That's the key.
And the way Morgan Housel translates this logic directly to personal finance and business operations is fascinating. If you are truly preparing for unseen risks, the right amount of savings in your bank account or the cash reserves on your company's balance sheet shouldn't actually make logical sense based on your current viable budget.
It should feel a bit excessive.
Right, it should feel like a little too much. It should literally make you wince a bit when you look at it.
Mm.
And similarly, the amount of debt you take on should be slightly less than what your sophisticated spreadsheet says you can comfortably handle.
Because that spreadsheet assumes everything goes exactly to plan.
Right. But I have to push back here, because this is where theory hits the brutal reality of the business world.
Okay, let's hear it.
In a highly competitive environment, holding massive cash reserves feels incredibly inefficient. Cash sitting in a bank account is losing value to inflation. It isn't generating a return. If I'm a CEO and I try to tell my aggressive venture capital board or my activist investors, hey, we're going to sit on 20% cash and underleverage our assets because of a phantom disaster I can't even name, they are going to fire me. How do you justify over-preparing for a ghost?
It is a phenomenal challenge, and you're right, it causes massive tension in boardrooms. It's why so many seemingly successful companies fail overnight. They optimize for perfect efficiency.
Just in time, everything.
Exactly. They run just-in-time supply chains. They maximize their debt to juice the return on equity. They squeeze every penny of idle cash. But perfect efficiency assumes a perfectly predictable world. It assumes the blueprint is real.
Which we've established it's not.
When the world inevitably surprises them, a port shuts down, a pandemic hits, credit freezes, that brittle efficiency shatters instantly. This is where we bring in a vital quote from the author Nassim Taleb. Invest in preparedness, not in prediction.
That's the golden rule right there, invest in preparedness.
Mm.
But how do you pitch that to the board?
To survive those conversations with your partners or your board, you have to fundamentally reframe what that inefficient cash actually represents. It is
Right.
not idle money. It is an insurance policy against the unpredictable.
Okay.
You have to explain that your financial and operational preparation should not make sense in a normal, calm world. Why? Because historically, the events that cause the most damage, the true existential threats, always sound completely absurd before they happen.
Right. If you told a board in 2019 to prepare for the entire global economy to shut down for a year,
They would have laughed you out of the room.
they'd think you were crazy.
Exactly. If your safety margin only protects you from the risks that seem reasonable today, it will unequivocally fail you when the unreasonable reality arrives.
So the expectation of risk, just the general humble knowledge that something bad will happen, even if you don't know what is infinitely more valuable than a specific, highly detailed forecast of risk that is likely to be wrong anyway.
Exactly. You are building shock absorbers for your business, not crystal balls. You want to build a vehicle that can drive over a pothole you didn't see, rather than trying to map the location of every pothole in the world.
Which brings us to our final key idea, the ultimate cost of unseen risk. And to drive this point home, the author leaves us with one incredibly vivid, unforgettable illustration. It proves that the true danger doesn't necessarily lie in the sheer magnitude of the risk itself, but entirely in your lack of preparation for it.
This is such a powerful story.
It's the story of Harry Houdini.
Houdini was arguably the ultimate master of managing risk.
He really was. I mean, the man made a global living out of defying death on a daily basis. He survived being buried alive under 6 feet of heavy sand. He survived being handcuffed, chained, and thrown into freezing rivers.
He was a professional at calculating risk.
Yes, and he was also a fiercely conditioned amateur boxer, and part of his famous routine involved inviting the biggest, strongest men in the audience to come up onto the stage and punch him in the stomach as hard as they possibly could.
And he survived those brutal heavyweight punches easily, night after night. But why? Because they were planned risks. When he stood on that stage, he was entirely braced.
He knew it was coming.
He was flexing his solar plexus, he was steadying his physical stance, he was holding his breath in a very specific physiological way. He had a strategy for the impact, he was expecting the blow.
But then comes the tragedy. It's October 1926. Houdini is backstage in his dressing room in Montreal.
Just relaxing on a couch.
Right, he's recovering from a broken ankle. He's just resting. A university student named Gordon Whitehead comes in to meet him. Now, Whitehead, thinking he was just playfully recreating the famous stage trick he'd heard so much about, unexpectedly leans over and punches Houdini in the stomach several times, hard.
Houdini was caught completely off guard. He was sitting down. He wasn't flexed. He wasn't braced.
And because of that completely unplanned, unexpected jab, his appendix ruptured. He tried to perform his show the next day, pushing through the pain, but a few days later, Harry Houdini, the man who conquered the most terrifying physical challenges imaginable, died from an infection caused by that single rupture.
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast. Houdini was arguably the greatest master in human history at surviving planned, catastrophic, highly visible risks. He could compute all the complex variables of picking a padlock underwater while holding his breath.
Yeah, which is insane.
But a mundane, relatively weak jab from a college student killed him simply because his mental and physical guard was down. He wasn't braced for it.
It wasn't the force of the punch, it was the pure element of surprise.
Exactly. And the takeaway for you listening is profound. In your career or running your business, you can actually survive massive, industry-shaking disruptions if you see them coming on the horizon.
Because you can prepare.
Right. If you know a new competitor is entering the market or regulation is changing, you brace for impact. You pivot the product line, you restructure the debt, you prepare the team. But a minor, totally unseen operational hiccup, a small shift in consumer behavior you arrogantly ignored, or a personal blind spot in your leadership style that you didn't manage that can completely take you down if it catches you relaxed and off guard.
You always have to keep your guard up for the mundane. You have to maintain that baseline level of tension, that margin of safety, that shock absorber, even when the sun is shining and everything feels perfect.
So if we synthesize all these key ideas together, the absolute soul of this chapter from Morgan Housel is that risk is an absolute certainty, but its form is a complete mystery.
Yes.
We've looked at Victor Prather's tragic spacesuit mishap at the edge of the atmosphere. We've looked at the brilliant 1930s economist completely missing the Great Depression while it was destroying the country. And we've seen Harry Houdini's fatal surprise in his dressing room.
All entirely unseen risks.
The central lesson connecting all of this is blindingly clear. We must stop wasting our energy trying to compute the exact nature, timing, and magnitude of tomorrow's disasters. Instead, we have to build personal, financial, and operational lives that are robust enough and flexible enough to withstand a punch we didn't see coming.
It's about moving from arrogance to humility, and from fragile efficiency to robust preparedness. So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about the biggest, scariest disaster you are currently planning for in your business or your personal life right now.
Get a clear picture of it in your head.
Think about the massive spreadsheets, the intricate contingency plans, the expensive insurance policies you've bought for that specific scenario. Now ask yourself, if that specific disaster never happens, but something completely unrelated hits you from the side tomorrow, is your current safety net actually completely useless? Are you preparing for a specific punch, or have you prepared your body to take a hit?
That is the defining question for long-term survival.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you think predicting the outside world is hard, wait until you try to predict your own happiness. Next time, we are diving into the tragedy of a life where almost everything gets materially better, but happiness goes absolutely nowhere.
Oh, this is going to be a good one.
We'll be exploring the timeless, deeply psychological trap of expectations and reality. You definitely won't want to miss it.
Picture a multimillionaire, right?
Right.
He's standing in the kitchen of the sprawling Silicon Valley home.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
He's the founder of a globally recognized tech company. His net worth places him squarely in, like, the top 0.1% of the global population.
Right, so he has everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He has access to the best healthcare, the safest neighborhoods, literally limitless material comfort.
Yeah.
Yet, staring into his coffee, his chest is tight with anxiety. He feels like he's falling behind. He feels genuinely and deeply like an absolute, complete failure.
Wow.
Now, pivot your mind to a drastically different scene. A family of refugees has just arrived in a crumbling, mob-run neighborhood in New York City.
A total extreme shift.
Right. The streets are violent, the apartment is freezing, and they have absolutely nothing to their name.
Nothing at all.
But sitting on that bare floor, the parents are weeping with profound, overwhelming joy. They feel as though they have just won the lottery.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. So how can the human brain produce such wildly divergent realities? Like, how can the man who has everything feel completely hollow while the family facing objective poverty feels triumphant?
You know, it sounds totally paradoxical, like almost like a glitch in our psychological wiring.
Right, a glitch.
Yeah, but it is actually the defining cognitive mechanism of, well, the modern human experience.
And that sets up the core tension we are looking at in this chapter of our deep dive. For you listening, we are exploring a world that, by almost every objective, measurable standard, consistently gets better.
Oh, absolutely.
We have these staggering leaps in medical technology, unprecedented access to information, and monumental amounts of global wealth being generated like every single day.
Yeah, the progress is undeniable.
But, and this is the crazy part, if you look at the sociological data on our baseline happiness, it stays completely flat.
Totally flat.
In some demographics, it's actually dropping significantly.
Which is an incredibly frustrating realization when you are, grinding 60 hours a week just to get ahead in your career.
I mean, we've all been there.
Right. You achieve the goal, you hit the revenue milestone, you buy the house, and instead of that persistent sense of satisfaction you were promised.
That promised land, right?
Exactly. Instead of that, you just feel this fleeting spike of relief, followed by an immediate, crushing exhaustion.
So, over the course of this deep dive, we're going to explore the hidden mechanics of happiness, success, and wealth by looking at Chapter 3 of our source material.
And this chapter focuses entirely on the powerful, invisible force of expectations.
Right. So for anyone listening, whether you are building a business, managing a team, or, just trying to figure out how to live a reasonably good life without burning out in the process, this is the foundational mechanism you have to understand.
It really is the foundation.
We are going to break down why managing what you expect is actually far more important and far more within your locus of control than managing what you achieve.
It's a profound shift in perspective, especially for highly ambitious, driven individuals.
Yeah.
Our entire educational and economic system is built to make us fixate on the achievement side of the equation.
Yeah.
We're taught to optimize our output.
Hustle culture, basically.
Exactly. But as the research clearly demonstrates, the expectation side is where the actual lived experience of your life takes place.
Right.
If you get the achievement side right, but ignore the expectation side, you are mathematically guaranteeing your own misery.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with a foundational myth that the sources aggressively dismantle. That's the concept of objective wealth.
Oh, this is fascinating.
We talk about wealth in society as if it's like a physical law of the universe, like it is a specific number in a bank account, right?
Like a finish line.
Yeah, and once you cross that threshold, you achieve the state of being wealthy, which should inherently trigger the state of being happy.
And the data, along with basic neuroscience, tells us that objective wealth simply does not exist in the human brain.
Wait, really? It doesn't exist at all?
Not at all. Our neurological hardware does not possess a sensor for absolute value. It only possesses sensors for relative value.
Okay, relative to what?
Well, everything we evaluate, our income, our square footage, our physical attractiveness, our success, is calculated purely in relation to the people in our immediate vicinity.
So it's all about the neighbors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The legendary investor Charlie Munger pointed this out years ago. He argued that the driving force of the global economy isn't greed, as most macroeconomic models assume.
Which is what we're always taught.
Right. But the actual driving force is envy.
I want to pause on that because labeling it envy can feel a bit, reductive or moralistic.
Sure, it sounds like a character flaw.
Yeah, we tend to think of envy as this toxic, malicious trait that only petty people have.
Right.
But if we look at the evolutionary psychology behind relative deprivation theory, envy is actually a highly adaptive survival mechanism.
Totally.
Like in a hunter-gatherer tribe, if you don't care what your neighbor has, you might literally starve when winter comes.
Because you aren't stockpiling enough.
Right. Subconsciously, every single human is constantly scanning their environment and asking, what are my peers doing? What resources have they secured? Because whatever that baseline is, that is exactly what I require to maintain my status and, my survival.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. It's the ultimate path of least resistance for the brain to determine what constitutes a normal life.
We just outsource the definition.
Exactly. We outsource our definition of success to the people around us. And this isn't some byproduct of modern capitalism either.
Right. This goes way back.
Yeah, the sources bring up the philosopher Montesquieu, writing roughly 275 years ago. He diagnosed this perfectly.
What did he say?
He wrote that if a person only wished to be happy, it would be quite easy. But, he noted, we wish to be happier than other people.
And that's the trap.
Right, and that is exceedingly difficult because we constantly believe others to be far happier than they actually are.
Wow. 2.5 centuries ago, Montesquieu is describing the exact same cognitive trap we fall into today.
Nothing has changed.
We don't just want a good life, we demand a life that is demonstrably better than the guy next door, whose life we are wildly overestimating based on external signals anyway.
Yeah, we only see their highlight reel.
Exactly. Let's ground this with the ultimate historical example, John D. Rockefeller.
Oh, this is a great comparison.
Adjusted for inflation, his wealth at his peak is generally estimated to be north of $300 or $400 billion.
Just an unfathomable amount of money.
He was a titan of industry with unprecedented literal power over the globe. But consider what the richest man in the history of the world did not have.
Right.
He never had a single Advil to cure a headache. He didn't have sunscreen. Most crucially, he didn't have penicillin.
No antibiotics at all.
Right. If he got a minor bacterial infection from a paper cut, he was in serious life-threatening danger.
Meanwhile, a person living near the poverty line today can walk into a local pharmacy and buy ibuprofen, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and climate control shelter.
For like $20.
Exactly. In terms of biological security and physical comfort, an average person today lives a life that Rockefeller could not have purchased with all the gold on earth.
It's incredible when you frame it like that.
And yet, that person today does not walk out of the pharmacy feeling richer than John D. Rockefeller.
Logically, having a cure for a lethal infection for $20 should make you feel like a deity.
You'd think so.
But psychologically, our brains refuse to anchor our expectations to historical figures. I mean, I am not comparing my access to healthcare to an oil baron from 1910.
Of course not.
I am comparing my car to my brother-in-law's car. I am comparing my salary to my college roommate's salary.
It's all local.
And the insidious part of this mechanism, this hedonic adaptation, is that when the general quality of life goes up for society at large, your baseline expectations rise in lockstep.
That rising tide lifts all boats, but it also raises the docks.
Yes. It completely neutralizes any subjective gains and happiness that those technological or economic improvements should have provided.
Which perfectly explains the story of Gary Kremen that you alluded to in the hook. Kremen was the founder of Match.com.
Right.
In 2007, the New York Times ran a fascinating profile on him. At the time, his net worth was roughly $10 million.
Which, just to put in perspective for the listener, easily placed him in the top half of 1% of wealth in the United States.
Very wealthy.
Globally, he was in a microscopic fraction of the elite. He was undeniably mathematically wealthy.
But the crucial variable is where he lived. He was living in Silicon Valley.
Oh, the peer group.
Exactly. His peer group wasn't the median American. His peer group consisted of venture capitalists, tech unicorn founders, and early Google employees.
So his 10 million looked like pocket change.
Right. Because the people he interacted with at the coffee shop or at his children's private school had tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. Kremen told the reporter he felt like a nobody.
A nobody with $10 million.
Yeah. He was working frantic 60 to 80-hour weeks because he felt a crushing financial inadequacy. $10 million in the bank, and he is grinding himself to the bone just to reach what his brain perceived as the baseline of normal.
Let's put that in direct contrast with the other anecdote from the sources, the story of Ben Frantz.
Yes, an incredible story.
Frantz is a historical figure who later became a prominent lawyer and was the chief prosecutor for the United States at one of the Nuremberg trials. But his childhood was brutally hard.
Extremely tough.
His family fled intense persecution in Romania. They traveled to America in the dead of winter on the open deck of a ship, nearly freezing to death.
Wow.
And they settled in a dilapidated neighborhood in New York known as Hell's Kitchen. It was entirely controlled by organized crime. Violence, poverty, and disease were just the daily reality.
By any objective modern standard, that is a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
It is the definition of extreme adversity.
Right.
But Frantz later recounted that his parents were thrilled. They were absolutely sincerely overjoyed to be living in a mob-run slum.
Which sounds insane to us. Why?
Because the human brain calculates emotion based on the gap between expectation and reality.
The yak.
Right. Relative to the violent systemic persecution they had just barely survived in Eastern Europe, a tough neighborhood in New York was a massive, life-altering improvement.
The contrast was huge.
Exactly. The contrast between what they had been conditioned to expect from life and what they were currently experiencing generated overwhelming joy.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism that tortured the Silicon Valley multimillionaire, just operating in reverse.
Yeah, precisely.
And we see this in modern everyday interactions, too. The sources mention a friend of the author who grew up in abject, severe poverty in an African nation.
Right.
Today, he lives in California and works in the highly lucrative tech sector. He has plenty of money,
He's made it.
but to this day, he is genuinely, viscerally moved by the simple act of eating a hot meal.
That's beautiful, actually.
Because his baseline expectation was forged in a furnace where food was incredibly scarce. So the abundance of a simple restaurant meal still registers as a massive positive gap.
What's fascinating here is we need to introduce the concept of dopamine baselines.
Okay, let's go there.
When we acquire wealth or achieve status, it acts neurologically exactly like a pharmacological substance. It releases a massive spike of dopamine.
And that feels incredible.
It does. It alleviates anxiety. It provides a sense of security and power. But the brain is designed to maintain homeostasis.
It wants to level out.
Right. It quickly builds a tolerance to that specific level of wealth or status. When you build a tolerance to the drug of wealth, the previous dosage no longer gets you high.
It merely keeps you from feeling sick.
Exactly. No amount is ever enough. You continuously require a larger and larger hit just to feel normal.
And if we transpose that biological reality onto the modern technological landscape, specifically social media, it becomes terrifying.
It really does.
We have taken this evolutionary envy engine and strapped it to a nuclear reactor. Historically, your brain's comparison group was limited to physical proximity.
Your actual neighbors.
Right. You compared your harvest to the farmer next door. You compared your car to the guy down the street. It was a finite, localized denominator.
Yeah.
Today, through platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn, you are comparing your everyday, messy, unedited, behind-the-scenes reality to the highly curated, heavily filtered, airbrushed highlight reel of 8 billion people.
It creates an environment of continuous, inescapable status anxiety.
It's exhausting.
You aren't just reacting to one neighbor getting a promotion anymore. In a single scroll, your brain is bombarded with imagery of acquaintances taking luxury vacations in the Maldives, former colleagues launching successful startups, and influencers displaying flawless physiques.
Right, the denominator of your envy has expanded to a global scale.
Making it mathematically impossible to ever feel as though you have enough relative to your peers.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. It's like you are running on a treadmill, right? But someone has strapped a VR headset to your face.
I like this.
In the virtual reality projection, you see this beautiful, sunlit destination, a composite of all the wealth, success, and status you see online. You feel like if you just sprint hard enough, you'll reach it.
But you're on a treadmill.
Right. In the physical reality, the machine is programmed to automatically match your pace. The faster you run, the faster the belt spins.
Yeah.
You are exhausting yourself, your heart rate is redlining, but you never actually close the distance to the destination. Because the destination is a mirage generated by shifting expectations.
There's an excellent visualization of lifestyle creep. Your objective speed, your income, your title, your assets is increasing dramatically.
Right, you feel like you aren't moving.
Right. Your positional status relative to the virtual finish line remains completely static.
So if we are translating this into a practical takeaway for you, the listener, it comes down to ruthlessly auditing your inputs.
You have to.
You cannot surgically remove the envy mechanism from your brain. It's hardwired into your prefrontal cortex. But you can exert total control over what data you feed into that algorithm.
Yes.
You must be intensely, uncomfortably aware of who you are using as your comparative baseline.
Because if you intentionally immerse yourself in environments, whether physical or digital, where the baseline is private aviation and 8-figure exits,
Then your commercial first-class ticket and mid-six-figure salary are going to register neurologically as a humiliating downgrade.
Exactly. You have to actively curate your peer group to protect your expectations.
You are the architect of your own baseline.
Yes. But we also have to acknowledge that this extreme hyperstratification wasn't always the default state of society.
Oh, this is a great point.
There was a specific era in modern American history where this envy engine was running at a much lower RPM, an era that we constantly look back on with intense, almost mythic nostalgia.
The 1950s.
I'm talking about the 1950s.
Yeah. This is a fascinating historical pivot, because if you poll people across various demographics and ask them when life was economically superior, when society felt more secure.
When the American dream felt attainable.
Exactly. A massive percentage of the population will point directly to the 1950s.
They absolutely will.
The prevailing cultural narrative is that a single earner, often without a college degree, could comfortably support a family of five, own a detached suburban home, buy two cars, take a driving vacation every summer, and save for a pension.
It sounds idyllic.
It is viewed as this unparalleled golden age of middle-class prosperity.
That narrative is deeply entrenched in our cultural consciousness. And yet, the macroeconomic data completely, unequivocally debunks it.
Completely debunks.
The objective statistical reality is that the 1950s were drastically, shockingly poorer than the modern era.
Okay, I want to push back on that because I think a lot of listeners will hear that and feel skeptical. They might say, wait a minute, poorer on paper, maybe, but my grandfather bought a house on a factory worker's salary. Today, two college-educated professionals can barely afford a starter home in a major city.
Right.
How does the data account for the actual localized cost of living and the reality of a single-income household?
It's a vital pushback, and we have to look closely at the mechanism of how that single-income household functioned. Let's look at the hard stats first, and then address the perception.
Lay the stats on us.
The sources highlight a 1953 cover story in Life magazine. The magazine confidently proclaims that the country had just lived through economically the greatest year in its history.
Greatest year in its history.
They quote a taxi driver who marvels that in the 1930s, his biggest worry was how to afford food. But now, his biggest problem is simply where to park.
That perfectly captures the psychological euphoria of the era.
It does. But let's look at the underlying numbers. In 1955, the median family income, fully adjusted for inflation through today's dollars, was roughly $29,000.
Wow.
Today, the median family income is over $70,000.
That is a staggering differential. You're talking about less than half the purchasing power.
Correct. Hourly wages today are approximately 50% higher than they were in the 1950s, adjusting for inflation.
Okay, but what about the housing argument I brought up?
Let's look at it. Homeownership in 1950 was actually 12% lower than it is today.
Wait, really?
Yeah, and the homes that people were buying on that single factory salary, they were, on average, a third smaller than the average new home built today. More importantly, they held more people.
So the architectural reality of the 1950s dream home is vastly different than what we picture today.
Vastly.
We aren't talking about a four-bedroom house with an ensuite bathroom and an open-concept kitchen. We are talking about a 950-square-foot box with one bathroom for a family of 4 or 5.
Precisely. The single-income household was viable because the material standard of living was radically lower.
Ah.
In 1950, a family spent 29% of their total budget just on basic food. Today, that number hovers around 13%.
That's a huge chunk of your income.
Right. Clothing was vastly more expensive relative to income. Healthcare was cheaper, primarily because advanced interventions like MRI machines, complex bypass surgeries, and modern oncology simply didn't exist.
You can't pay for what hasn't been invented.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And regarding the workplace, if you think modern corporate culture is stressful, workplace fatalities were 3 times higher in the 1950s than they are today.
Okay, so if incomes were mathematically lower, houses were cramped, a third of your paycheck went to groceries, and your job was statistically far more likely to kill you.
Yeah.
Why on earth has this decade been enshrined as the pinnacle of American wealth and happiness?
The secret of the 1950s wasn't high wages or cheap goods. The secret was compressed economic inequality. It was the era of flatter pay.
Flatter pay, meaning the distance between the factory floor worker and the CEO was incredibly narrow compared to today.
Exactly. And we have to look at the structural historical mechanisms that forced this compression. During World War II, the federal government was terrified of wartime inflation and domestic labor strikes disrupting the supply chain. So they established the National War Labor Board.
And what did that do?
This board literally set and controlled wages across major industries, massively shrinking the income gap between different socioeconomic classes.
Wow.
Furthermore, you had top marginal tax rates in the post-war era that exceeded 90%.
Wait, 90%?
Yes. Those punitive tax rates essentially disincentivized corporations from paying executives exorbitant multi-million-dollar salaries because the government would confiscate almost all of it.
So what did they do with the money?
Instead, companies reinvested that money or distributed it more evenly among the workforce.
So that structural flatness, born out of wartime policy and heavy taxation, carried directly over into the cultural fabric of the post-war 1950s.
Yes.
The economic gap between you and your neighbors was artificially suppressed.
Which means your expectations were perfectly structurally capped.
That makes so much sense.
You didn't feel inadequate living in a 950 square foot house because every single person you went to church with, every person you worked with, and every person you saw on your street lived in a 950 square foot house.
Right. You didn't feel deprived when your kids wore hand-me-down clothes or when your luxury summer vacation consisted of pitching a canvas tent in a state park, because that was the universal standard.
Everyone else was doing the exact same thing.
There was no social pressure to inflate your lifestyle beyond your means because the people you subconsciously used as your comparative baseline didn't have the means to inflate theirs either.
The envy engine was idling. It wasn't revving at all.
Man, that's powerful.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this explains the shift we see starting in the late 1970s and accelerating wildly through the 1980s.
The Reagan era.
Right. That post-war economic compression fractured. Tax rates dropped, deregulation occurred, and we entered an era of highly stratified economic growth.
The era of Gordon Gekko, leveraged buyouts, and the explosion of executive compensation?
Yes. A small percentage of the population began growing exponentially wealthier, completely divorcing themselves from the median trajectory.
Leaving everyone else behind.
Now, the median income continued to grow. People were still objectively getting richer, but it didn't keep pace with the top 1%.
And here's the psychological trap.
The extravagant, highly visible lifestyles of that ultra-wealthy few artificially inflated the aspirations of the many.
Because the media landscape evolved alongside the economy. Suddenly, through cable television, glossy magazines, and eventually the internet, we had a front row seat to how the billionaires lived.
We saw it all.
The positional goods, the things we buy to signal our status, shifted from a reliable Chevy to a luxury European SUV.
Exactly. Today's economy is undeniably brilliant at generating wealth and innovation, but it is arguably even better at generating the display of wealth.
And the display of wealth is what maximizes envy.
Yes, you can't just be content with a safe, objectively wealthy middle-class life when your digital environment is constantly bombarding you with images of people who seem to exist on a higher plane of reality.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I think we need a robust analogy for this because it perfectly explains the modern anxiety epidemic.
Let's hear it.
Think of society like an audience at a massive general admission outdoor concert.
Right.
If everyone sits down on the grass, everyone has a perfectly fine, unobstructed view of the stage, it's comfortable, it's equitable, and nobody is straining. That is the 1950s.
I can picture that.
But then one person in the front row decides they want a slightly better view, so they stand up. The sheer act of them standing up blocks the view of the people behind them.
Right.
So what do the people in the second row do? They have to stand up just to see. And then the third row stands. Within 5 minutes, a cascading wave of panic sweeps through the crowd, and now all 50,000 people are standing.
And what is the net result?
The net result is that everyone's view of the stage is exactly the same as it was when they were sitting. Nothing has improved.
But the effort level has spiked.
Yes. Now, everyone's legs hurt, everyone is exhausted, everyone is shoving each other for space, and the baseline effort required just to participate in the concert has multiplied exponentially.
That's spot on.
The ultra-wealthy stood up in the 1980s, and the rest of the middle class has been exhausting themselves ever since, just trying to maintain their baseline view of the American dream. We don't actually miss the 1950s economy. Nobody actually wants to go back to 1950s dentistry or racial segregation or 900 square foot houses. What we desperately miss is the 1950s equality of expectations. We miss sitting on the grass.
That is a phenomenal conceptualization. We are suffering from an arms race of positional goods.
So the practical takeaway for you, the listener, is acknowledging that pure economic growth, whether it's securing a major promotion, scaling your startup's revenue, or seeing your stock portfolio compound, will only translate to actual lived happiness if you aggressively prevent it from being smothered by inflated expectations.
You cannot buy your way out of the pressure.
You simply cannot out-earn a shifting baseline. If you get a $40,000 bump in salary and you immediately convince convince yourself that you now need a car that costs $40,000 more just to reflect your new status.
You were just standing up at the concert.
You have burned the excess capital that could have bought you freedom, and you've bought an expensive anchor instead.
You've sped up the treadmill without moving an inch forward.
Exactly. So we've analyzed how this dynamic operates on a macro societal scale. We understand the historical illusion of the 1950s, but I want to pivot to the micro.
Let's do it.
How does this gap between expectation and reality operate on a deeply personal, individual level? Especially for the high achievers listening, the people who are biologically wired to pursue excellence and build things.
This brings us to a psychological framework that is incredibly confronting. Actual objective circumstances do absolutely nothing to dictate your emotions.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. The emotion you feel in any given moment, whether it's transcendent joy, crippling depression, or just numb apathy, is not generated by the event itself.
Then what generates it?
It is generated entirely, 100%, by the gap between what you subconsciously expected to happen and what actually materialized in reality.
Okay, so it's a formula.
Yes. We can express this as a simple formula. Happiness equals reality minus expectations.
So the emotion lives entirely in the gap.
Precisely. If your expectations are incredibly low, almost pessimistic, then even a tiny incremental success feels like a miracle. A massive positive gap opens up. But if your expectations demand absolute perfection, if you feel entitled to a massive win, then even an objectively monumental achievement feels completely hollow.
Because it just met the baseline?
Exactly. It generates no joy because it merely met the baseline you already established in your mind.
Let's use the Will Smith trajectory that the sources highlight, because it is a perfect case study in how fame distorts this formula.
Yeah, his story is very illustrative.
Will Smith separates his life and his relationship with fame into 3 distinct psychological phases. Phase 1 is the process of becoming famous. He describes this era as pure magic.
And why is that?
Because you start as a regular person in Philadelphia with standard baseline expectations. You expect to struggle, you expect anonymity, and suddenly millions of people know your name, you have access to incredible wealth, and doors fly open.
The reality vastly exceeds the expectation.
Exactly. The positive gap is massive, and therefore the joy is overwhelming.
But then comes phase 2, being famous. This is the era of his peak dominance as the biggest movie star on the planet. And yet, he describes this phase as a mixed bag.
Which is wildly unintuitive to the average person. You are universally beloved, you are making $20 million a movie, you have absolute creative freedom. How can that possibly be a mixed bag?
Because the cognitive baseline has reset. Your brain's dopamine receptors have adjusted to the new normal.
The tolerance is high.
Right. Your expectation is no longer anonymity. Your expectation is universal adulation and massive financial compensation.
So you need more just to feel normal.
Exactly. So when your new blockbuster makes $150 million its opening weekend, it doesn't trigger a flood of joy. It merely meets the expectation.
The reality matched the baseline.
There's zero gap. Therefore, there is zero positive emotion. It just feels like a Tuesday.
And then inevitably comes phase 3, losing fame. Or at least experiencing a dip in that absolute peak dominance.
Which is painful.
He describes this as absolutely miserable. Because your expectation remains stubbornly high, you still subconsciously expect to be treated like an infallible superstar, but reality begins to fall short.
A movie flops.
Public opinion shifts. Suddenly, a negative gap opens up. And that negative gap generates intense suffering.
Even if, objectively, his life is still incredible.
Right. The objective circumstance of his life might still be better than 99.9% of people on Earth. He still has millions of dollars and a mansion. But because of the negative gap relative to his past expectations, he experiences it as misery.
We see this exact same pathology in elite athletics. The sources discuss the tennis prodigy Naomi Osaka.
Oh, this is a heartbreaking example.
She reached a point in her career where winning a major Grand Slam tournament, the absolute pinnacle of her sport, a goal that millions of athletes dedicate their entire lives to, stopped bringing her any joy whatsoever.
None at all.
She admitted publicly that winning only brought her a sense of relief.
That word relief is so incredibly heavy. It implies that she wasn't playing to achieve a high. She was playing to avoid a punishment.
That is exactly what happens when expectations become toxic. The expectation placed upon her by the media, her sponsors, and most destructively by herself was so staggeringly high that winning a Grand Slam was no longer viewed as an achievement.
It was just the baseline.
It was simply the baseline requirement. Winning was just successfully avoiding a negative gap.
Wow.
When absolute perfection is the baseline expectation, joy becomes mathematically impossible. You are just surviving the pressure.
Let's flip the script and look at the other extreme of this formula. A massive positive gap driven by subterranean expectations.
Okay, yes.
The sources delve into the political career of Harry Truman. If you look at Truman's biography before he was tapped to be vice president, it reads like a masterclass in aggressive mediocrity and outright failure.
It's a staggering resume of defeat.
Yeah.
He's a failed haberdashery retailer. His clothing store went bankrupt during a post-World War I recession.
He was a failed farmer.
He was a failed zinc miner. He was a failed oil driller.
Just failure after failure.
He eventually made his way into politics and became a senator, but he was widely dismissed by the Washington elite as a lackey, a mere puppet installed by the corrupt Pendergast political machine in Missouri. He commanded very little organic respect.
So the context is vital here. It's 1945. The world is engulfed in the most destructive conflict in human history, World War II.
Right.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a monolithic, godlike figure in American politics who had guided the country through the Depression and the war, suddenly dies in office.
And Harry Truman, the failed zinc miner from Missouri, becomes the president of the United States.
And the reaction from the public and the media is sheer, unadulterated terror.
Understandably.
The sources quote the Washington Post, which essentially prints a plea for mercy, stating plainly that Truman is vastly, dangerously unqualified for the monumental responsibilities thrust upon him.
The expectations were not just low, they were apocalyptic.
Yet, if you look at historical polling today, political scientists and historians consistently rank Harry Truman as a top 10 president, sometimes even placing him in the top 5, occasionally edging out FDR in specific metrics.
How does that happen? Did the oath of office magically imbue him with superhuman intellect and leadership capabilities?
Bro.
No. It happened because the expectations were so incredibly, historically low that any display of basic competence, any solid, rational decision he made completely blew the minds of the American public.
A minor policy success was perceived as a massive triumph.
Exactly. Navigating the end of the war without destroying the world felt like a literal miracle.
The emotion lives in the gap. Truman lived in a giant, comfortable, positive gap for almost his entire presidency because the baseline had been set at 0.
He benefited from the inverse of the Naomi Osaka trap. And this reveals a profound truth about human ambition.
What's that?
Everyone, whether you're a CEO, an elite athlete, a politician, or just a parent trying to get through a Tuesday, is ultimately in pursuit of that psychological space between expectations and reality.
We want that space.
The tragedy of human ambition is that we trick ourselves. We believe that what we desire is objective progress. We think we want the corner office, the bigger house, the verified check mark.
Right.
But what we actually crave is the neurochemical rush of the positive gap.
Right.
And the fatal flaw in our software is that once progress becomes your baseline expectation, it completely ceases to generate that gap.
Let's ground this with an analogy that I think everyone can feel viscerally. I want you to think about the concept of a thermostat. If you set the thermostat in your house to 80 degrees, your heating system is going to run continuously. It will burn massive amounts of energy, the machinery will degrade, and you'll eventually burn out the motor, all while trying to maintain an uncomfortably hot environment.
Right.
Your ambition is the heater, and your expectations are the thermostat. If you set your expectations to demand constant perfection and massive wealth, your ambition will burn you out trying to reach it.
You fry the system.
But if you simply lower the thermostat to a comfortable 68 degrees, the system relaxes. It operates efficiently.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The heat, the reality feels much better when the system isn't constantly straining to meet an impossible setting.
Exactly.
Or think about finding money. If you put on your winter coat for the first time in a year, reach into the pocket, and find a crumpled $20 bill you completely forgot about, you experience a genuine jolt of euphoria.
I love that feeling.
Now, compare that to Friday morning, when your regular bi-weekly paycheck hits your bank account. Your paycheck is technically worth vastly more than $20.
A lot more.
It represents your livelihood.
Yeah.
But does it give you that same rush of joy? Almost never.
Because you expected it.
It merely met the baseline. The $20 bill was completely unexpected, creating a 100% positive gap.
You aren't reacting to the objective financial value. You are reacting purely to the variance from your expectation.
Yeah.
So for the listener, the incredibly practical, though somewhat confronting takeaway from this section is that you must be hypervigilant against the relief trap.
Beware of relief.
I want you to take a hard, honest look at your recent professional or personal achievements. If you are hitting your KPIs, closing the deals, getting the promotions, and the primary emotion flooding your system is simply relief instead of joy,
You have a problem.
you have a severe systemic problem. Your expectations have become toxic to your psychological well-being.
Yeah.
By setting the bar so impossibly high that perfection is the only acceptable outcome, you are actively robbing your future self of the ability to experience joy.
You are building a prison out of your own standards.
Which perfectly sets up the final major question of this deep dive. If our expectations control literally everything, our personal happiness, our macro consumer confidence, how we judge historical figures, and how we experience our own lives, why do we spend 99% of our time, energy, and education trying to change our circumstances and barely 1% of our time actively managing our expectations?
Because society, economics, and our educational systems tell us that the equation of wealth and happiness is entirely weighted on the first variable.
Okay, lay out the equation.
If we break it down, the equation is simple. Variable 1 is what you have,
Yeah.
your reality. Variable 2 is what you expect, your baseline.
Got it.
We are conditioned from birth to focus obsessively on variable 1. We are told to get more income, acquire more skills, optimize our workflows, network harder, and forecast the future better.
Dolphins.
All of our professional development is targeted at maximizing what we have.
And we completely, utterly neglect variable number 2. We leave our expectations unmanaged, feral, and vulnerable to whatever marketing algorithms dictate they should be.
We just let them run wild.
And we do this despite the fact that the second variable is actually far more within our direct, immediate control than the first. I mean, I can't guarantee that the stock market will go up or that a client will sign a contract, but I can absolutely control the internal narrative of what I expect from my day.
There's a profound insight in the sources from Peter Kaufman, a highly successful CEO and thinker.
What does he say?
He points out a massive cognitive blind spot in human nature regarding how we assign value. He notes that we fiercely safeguard our material possessions simply because they have price tags attached to them.
Right.
We know what our car costs, so we lock the doors and park it in the garage. We know the monetary value of our home, so we buy elaborate alarm systems and insurance policies.
Makes sense.
But we deeply, catastrophically neglect the things in life that do not come with literal price tags. Things like our physical health, our close relationships, and crucially, our expectations.
We just leave them out in the open.
We leave them completely uninsured and unprotected, even though they are the exact mechanisms that dictate the actual quality of our lives.
It's absurd when you lay it out like that. We insure our televisions, but we don't insure our expectations, even though a shattered expectation will ruin our day, our week, or our marriage far faster than a broken TV ever could.
Charlie Munger, returning to him, had a hard and fast philosophical rule about this.
Mm-hmm.
He stated bluntly, the first rule of a happy life is low expectations.
The first rule.
It sounds pessimistic, but it is deeply pragmatic. He argued that if you walk through life with unrealistic, entitled expectations, you are mathematically guaranteeing a miserable existence.
So what's the solution?
His prescription was to cultivate highly reasonable, grounded expectations paired with a robust dose of stoicism to deal with the inevitable tragedies and bad outcomes that life throws at you.
The sources share an incredible counterintuitive anecdote about applying this to relationships, specifically marriage.
Oh, this is a great one.
The author has a friend named Brent who developed a theory. Brent argues that a marriage only truly thrives when both people wake up every morning wanting to help their spouse while expecting absolutely nothing in return.
I guarantee that sounds incredibly bleak to a lot of people upon first hearing it.
Oh, for sure.
Expect nothing from your life partner. It sounds like a recipe for being taken advantage of.
Right. It sounds like you're resigning yourself to a loveless, transactional roommate situation. But if you look closely at the mechanism, the result is beautiful.
How so?
If both partners are genuinely operating with that specific mindset, high output, zero expectation, what happens? They are constantly delightfully surprised by each other.
Oh, I see.
Every time the partner makes coffee or runs an errand or offers emotional support, it creates a massive positive gap because the baseline expectation was set at zero.
So instead of entitlement, it's gratitude.
Exactly. Instead of feeling resentful that their partner didn't read their mind, they feel constant gratitude for the things that do happen.
Now, I want to pause and validate how incredibly difficult this is to implement, particularly for a high-performing audience.
It is really hard.
Cultivating low expectations feels profoundly countercultural. To the kind of person who reads business books and listens to deep dives on strategy, lowering your expectations feels like giving up.
It feels like quitting.
It feels like you are minimizing your potential, settling for mediocrity, or adopting a loser's mentality.
That is the exact friction point. If I lower my expectations, won't I just become lazy? Won't I stop striving? If I don't expect to build a unicorn company, won't I just sit on the couch and watch Netflix all day?
That is the fear, but it is based on conflating two distinct psychological levers. The nuance here, and this is the absolute key to making this entire philosophy work without destroying your drive, is that you have to learn to surgically separate motivation from expectation.
Okay, I want to dig deep into that distinction, but break that down for me.
Motivation is the drive to execute. It is the desire to build a great company, to create groundbreaking art, to provide a phenomenal life for your family.
Okay.
You can be highly intensely motivated. You can put in 80-hour weeks. You can iterate on your product. You can strive for excellence. That is motivation, and it is healthy.
So keep the motivation high.
But simultaneously, you must actively manage the psychological expectation of what that external progress will actually do for your internal soul.
So I am fiercely motivated to climb the mountain, but I do not hold the expectation that the view from the summit will magically cure my anxiety or make me a whole person.
Precisely. You work relentlessly to achieve the goal, but you do not saddle the goal with the impossible burden of providing permanent spiritual nirvana.
That's a huge distinction.
You expect that achieving the goal will simply introduce a new set of logistical circumstances. It will solve some problems and create new ones.
Right.
If you don't separate these two levers, imagine the alternative. Imagine a life where everything does get objectively better. Your income triples, your health is optimized, your business scales, but you never ever appreciate a single second of it. Because the moment your circumstances improve, your expectations instantly snap up to devour the joy.
That is a modern tragedy.
It is.
It's like the Greek myth of Tantalus. He is standing in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree, but every time he reaches for the fruit, the branches pull away. Every time he bends down to drink, the water recedes.
He can never get it.
He is surrounded by abundance, but condemned to eternal starvation and thirst. That is what an unmanaged expectation does to your ambition. It ensures you are forever starved, no matter how much you achieve.
And it is completely avoidable. But only if you treat expectation management as an active, daily discipline, not just a passive, good-to-know mindset. It requires cognitive effort.
So as we synthesize this chapter, what does this all mean for you, the listener? How do you actually operationalize this tomorrow morning?
Think about your career and your life like a sophisticated operating system.
Okay.
The offense of your life is your ambition. It's making money, getting promoted, launching the product, buying the house. It's visible, it's celebrated on LinkedIn, and it has a clear price tag.
We all love playing offense.
But as the cliche goes, and as the data supports, long-term survival is determined by your defense.
Exactly. And in the game of modern life, playing defense means fiercely protecting your mind from inflated expectations.
Guarding the thermostat. You have to guard your internal thermostat and refuse to let society or Instagram or your peer group crank it up every time you achieve a win.
Because if your defense is leaky, if your expectations automatically inflate to match every single dollar of your income, no amount of offensive points, no amount of wealth or objective success will ever make you feel secure.
You will just keep running faster on that VR treadmill.
The practical takeaway is to treat managing your expectations with the exact same rigor, the exact same analytical focus, and the exact same energy that you apply to advancing your career or growing your investment portfolio.
You need a defensive strategy for your expectations, just like you have an offensive strategy for your revenue.
It requires a daily internal audit. You have to catch yourself when you say, I'll be happy when, and reframe it.
It is essential work.
Yeah.
Because if we pull all the threads of this deep dive together into one core memorable insight, it is this paradoxical truth.
What's the truth?
Progress is a wonderful, vital thing. We should strive for it. Medicine, technology, and economic growth alleviate massive amounts of human suffering.
Of course.
But progress is entirely, totally useless to your actual subjective well-being if you allow your expectations to rise in lockstep with your achievements.
It completely neutralizes the victory. It turns the win into mere relief.
Exactly. True success isn't just about accumulating more wealth, more status, or more accolades. True success is the deliberate engineering and the vicious daily protection of the gap between your reality and your expectations.
Because that gap is the only place where your happiness can actually live.
That gap is the whole ballgame.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've gone from the biological reality of John D. Rockefeller's lack of antibiotics to the structural tax codes that created the 1950s economic illusion, to the neuroscience of Will Smith's fame trajectory and the danger of the Naomi Osaka relief trap.
It's all connected.
For you listening, whether you are a curious beginner or a seasoned entrepreneur, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. You are now armed with the ultimate cognitive shortcut to understanding the invisible mechanics of happiness and success.
You know how the envy engine works?
And more importantly, you know how to build a firewall around your expectations.
And knowing how to manage the software of your own mind is, without question, the most valuable, unprized asset you can possess.
Absolutely. You now know the secret to managing your own mind's expectations. But what happens when you have to deal with the wild, unpredictable, and sometimes downright crazy minds of the geniuses who actually change the world?
That is a whole different challenge.
That's a story for our next deep dive.
What if the very traits that make your biggest business idol a visionary genius are like the exact same traits that make them an absolute maniac?
Oh, man. That is the ultimate paradox, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the person you look up to most in your career. The person whose biography is, sitting on your desk right now.
Right. The one whose quotes you analyze when you're trying to make a really tough strategic decision.
Exactly. You look at these extraordinary people, these unique minds that seemingly bend the whole world to their will, and you want those incredible results. You want the wealth, the innovation, the legacy.
But the uncomfortable reality is you almost never want to deal with how those minds actually operate behind closed doors. You want the revolutionary outputs, but you demand conventional inputs.
Which is just not how human psychology works.
Mm.
And that brings us to welcome you back to the deep dive. Today we have a really potent mission.
We do. We are unpacking a single, just absolutely fascinating chapter from Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever.
Yeah, it's chapter 4. It's called Wild Minds. And let me tell you, this premise is going to fundamentally shift your perspective on talent, ambition, and, well, the true cost of greatness.
In the next hour, you're going to learn why extraordinary thinkers are absolute package deals. You just cannot separate their brilliant innovations from their unpalatable, abrasive, or sometimes downright bizarre flaws.
If you are at all interested in business, leadership, or entrepreneurship, getting a grasp on this concept will totally change how you hire disruptive talent. It's going to change who you choose as a role model.
And honestly, it will force you to recalibrate how you manage your own expectations of success.
Sure.
Because whether you're building a startup or navigating your own career trajectory, you are going to encounter a wild mind.
So true. And if you don't understand the underlying, neurological architecture of how these individuals are wired, you're going to try to manage them like average employees.
Which just leads to massive mutual frustration. Or worse, you end up completely suppressing the exact genius you hired them for in the first place.
Right. So to really understand that anatomy, we have to look at the baseline. We have to understand what a wild mind actually looks like in its natural state before it even interacts with a business problem.
The core argument here is that to achieve things no ordinary person can achieve, an individual literally cannot be wired like an ordinary person.
Their default setting is fundamentally different, meaning they won't act normally, even in the most mundane, boring situations. And the text illustrates this with a story about Eliud Kipchoge.
Oh, this story is incredible. It completely reframes how you think about high performance.
It totally does. So for anyone who doesn't know, Kipchoge is widely recognized as the greatest marathon runner in human history.
And to contextualize this, you have to remember that elite marathon running isn't just a physical thing. It is an exercise in extreme, agonizing cognitive monotony.
Yes, the human brain is evolutionarily wired to conserve energy, right?
Exactly. When you are running at an elite pace for over 2 hours, your brain is just flooding your system with signals screaming at you to stop. Overriding those survival instincts requires a highly specific neurological profile.
And we see that profile perfectly on display at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. So Kipchoge has just won the marathon, securing his second Olympic gold. He is at the absolute pinnacle of human physical achievement.
And after the race, they put him in this cramped, dull staging room to wait for the medal ceremony.
Right, he's in there with two other runners who also medaled, Bashir Abdi and Abdi Nagai. They have hours to kill before they walk out to the podium.
Just put yourself in that room. You have just run 26 miles. You are completely exhausted.
You're waiting. And they're like, what do? You do what Abdi and Nagai did. You reach into your bag, you pull out your smartphone, you connect to the Wi-Fi, and you scroll.
You look for a dopamine hit, right?
Yeah.
Something to distract your brain from the physical pain and the sheer boredom of the room.
Because that is the standard behavioral response of a healthy modern human brain.
Yeah.
But Kipchoge, he does not do that.
No, he doesn't.
For hours, Kipchoge just sits in a chair, staring at a blank wall, in perfect silence. He doesn't read a book, he doesn't scroll his phone, he doesn't even make small talk.
He just stares at the wall for hours.
It was so completely alien to normal human behavior that the other runners literally joked to the press later, he is not human.
And you know, that joke captures a really deep biological reality. To do what he does, his reward circuitry just cannot function like yours or mine.
Let's break down the mechanics of that because it's fascinating.
Well, if your brain requires constant novel stimulation, like if your dopamine receptors are demanding a new piece of information or a new image every few minutes, you fundamentally cannot endure the psychological barrenness of a 2-hour marathon.
You'd go crazy. The boredom alone would crush your resolve way before the physical fatigue even set in.
Exactly. So Kipchoge's ability to sit in a dull room and stare at a wall without experiencing psychological distress is not just some quirky habit.
Right. It is the exact same neurological mechanism that allows him to block out the agonizing monotony of the pavement.
You cannot decouple his physical endurance from his mental abnormality. They are literally the exact same trait.
I like to look at this through the lens of engineering. Think of it like building a Formula One race car.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah, because when engineers construct an F1 car, they do not include air conditioning. They don't put in a stereo system or cup holders or nice passenger seats.
Right. They strip out every single piece of standard equipment to make the car as light and aerodynamically aggressive as possible.
Exactly. The car is optimized for a single extreme environment, going incredibly fast around a specific track. You get world-class performance in that one domain.
But if you try to take that same Formula One car to the grocery store to pick up some milk,
it's going to overheat, stall, and completely destroy its suspension on a speed bump. The lack of air conditioning isn't a flaw in the car. It is the very reason the car wins races.
that is just an incredibly precise way to think about cognitive architecture. You optimize the hardware for one singular extreme function, and by necessity, you sacrifice general utility.
Because the brain only has a finite amount of metabolic energy and cognitive bandwidth, right?
Yes, exactly. When Kipchoge is sitting in that room, he is not running the biological equivalent of a stereo system.
He isn't scrolling social media because his vehicle has been completely stripped of the need for low-level, continuous stimulation.
And for anyone listening who is building a team or evaluating talent, this fundamentally shifts your hiring paradigm.
It really does. When you seek out a top 1% performer in any field, whether it's an elite programmer, a master negotiator, or an unparalleled creative director, you must expect them to lack standard features.
You cannot demand the output of a Formula One car and then get annoyed when the driver cannot comfortably navigate the corporate equivalent of a grocery store parking lot.
But, observing an athlete in a passive state of understimulation is one thing. A blank stare is relatively harmless.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's a lot more complicated in an office.
Right. The friction really arises when you take that stripped-down, highly specialized cognitive architecture and force it to interact with a complex, rigid social hierarchy.
The source material forces an examination of what happens when that specialized wiring does not result in silent meditation, but in active, destructive rebellion.
Because a blank stare doesn't break a company. But what happens when that missing stereo system is actually the part of the brain that governs impulse control, or basic manners, or respect for authority?
The text introduces a concept that is critical here. An extreme skill literally robs bandwidth from other parts of a person's personality.
It's a psychological principle of zero-sum cognitive allocation, right?
Precisely. The human brain's prefrontal cortex handles executive function, which includes both complex problem-solving and social regulation.
So if an individual's neurobiology allocates an overwhelming percentage of that processing power to say divergent thinking or pattern recognition.
Then the neural networks responsible for social compliance, patience, and emotional regulation are literally under-resourced.
Wow, so it's not necessarily that they're intentionally choosing to be difficult.
Exactly. It is that the bandwidth required to meticulously observe social graces is being actively consumed by their primary domain of genius.
And honestly, no one embodies that zero-sum reality more aggressively than John Boyd. This segment of the chapter is just staggering.
Oh, the John Boyd story is legendary. For good reason.
So John Boyd was a military strategist and arguably the greatest fighter pilot in American history. He revolutionized military aviation by writing a manual called the Aerial Attack Study.
Which was a massive deal. Because before Boyd, aerial dogfighting was mostly instinct and guesswork. It was just guys flying by the seat of their pants.
But Boyd looked at fighter jets and applied rigorous, multivariable calculus to the physics of flying. He developed what's known as the energy maneuverability theory.
He proved, mathematically, that a plane's ability to change course quickly, its maneuverability, was vastly more lethal in a dogfight than its top speed or how high it could fly.
And his mathematical models were so robust that they completely inverted the Pentagon's entire design philosophy.
Up until then, the military had been obsessed with building fast, heavy, high-altitude interceptors. Boyd proved that in an actual combat scenario, those planes were basically sitting ducks.
His insights directly led to the development of the F-15 and the F-16, which are still some of the most successful fighter aircraft ever built. The man possessed a once-in-a-generation mind for the physics of combat.
The military absolutely relied on his brain to win wars and design their future arsenal. But, and this is massive bunny, the military establishment despised John Boyd, the human being.
Because Boyd was an absolute terror to work with. He was relentlessly combative.
He would openly scream at superior officers in strategy meetings.
He was nearly court-martialed for setting hangars on fire. And the detail that perfectly illustrates his lack of social bandwidth, this is wild, in the middle of high-level Pentagon briefings, Boyd would frequently chew the calluses off his hands.
Just sitting there chewing his hands.
And then he would spit the dead skin across the boardroom table while generals were talking.
Just try to visualize that environment for a second. You have 4-star generals, men who have spent 30 years climbing a rigid, deeply conservative hierarchy built on discipline, protocol, and respect.
And sitting across from them is a subordinate who is literally spitting dead skin onto their briefing documents.
While telling them that their multi-billion-dollar procurement strategy is mathematically illiterate.
It's insane. The New York Times actually described him as a virtual non-person in the Air Force because he was so hated.
His performance reviews were a study in absolute contradiction.
Yeah, his superiors would write paragraphs praising him as a flying savant and a tactical genius. And then in the very next section, they would demand he be blocked from promotion.
Because he was completely intolerant of supervision and fundamentally insubordinate.
The Air Force desperately wanted to extract the genius of his mathematical models and just leave the abrasive, skin-spitting maniac behind.
But as the source text emphasizes, Boyd was an inseparable package. You do not get the aerial attack study without the insubordination.
Okay, I am going to stop you right there, because this is where I find myself pushing back hard against the premise.
Let's hear it.
Explaining this through zero-sum cognitive bandwidth makes sense biologically, sure. But in practice, doesn't this just become a highly intellectualized excuse for toxic management?
That is a very fair question.
Are we genuinely concluding that a business has to tolerate an abusive executive or like a brilliant programmer who spits on the table just because they write good code?
Right. Are we just enabling bad behavior?
Exactly. If we romanticize this tortured genius trope, aren't we just giving a free pass to sociopathy under the guise of innovation? Where is the line between a necessary biological trade-off and just enabling a destructive jerk?
That is the most vital tension in this entire analysis. It really is. And it is crucial to distinguish between a moral justification and a mechanical reality.
Okay, unpack that difference for me.
The text is not arguing that toxic behavior is morally acceptable, nor is it suggesting that a company must retain abusive personnel.
So it's not a free pass.
Not at all. What it is doing is forcing you to look clearly at the mechanical origins of disruptive innovation. Think about the specific psychological trait required to develop Boyd's theories in the first place.
You'd have to be insanely confident.
More than confident. You have to possess a mind that looks at decades of established, fiercely defended military doctrine, backed by the most powerful institution on earth, and says, you are all completely wrong, and I am going to prove it.
You have to have an astronomical level of defiance.
Exactly. You require a profound, almost pathological disregard for conventional wisdom and institutional authority.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Now, apply that same psychological hardware to a mundane administrative environment. You cannot realistically expect a brain that is functionally blind to the authority of a four-star general regarding aerodynamics to suddenly become hypersensitive to the authority of a mid-level HR manager regarding office decorum.
Wow. So the mechanism of his genius is defiance.
Yes. You cannot selectively program that defiance to turn on when he is looking at a blueprint and turn off when he is sitting in a staff meeting. It is an ambient trait. It is always running.
So it isn't an excuse, it's a brutal calculation.
Precisely. It is a risk-reward calculation that leadership must make with their eyes wide open.
If you hire a true disruptor, someone whose explicit value is breaking existing paradigms, you are importing someone who is mechanically averse to conformity.
You have to weigh the empirical value of their output against the empirical cost of their friction. If the friction destroys the team's ability to execute, you fire them. But you cannot hire a paradigm breaker and be shocked when they break your internal paradigms.
That reframes the entire concept of culture fit for me. You see companies post job listings constantly looking for renegades, disruptors, out-of-the-box thinkers.
Oh, all the time. They want the aesthetic of Steve Jobs.
Yes. They hire someone who has a track record of brilliant, unconventional work. And the moment that new hire actually acts like a renegade, the moment they bypass the chain of command to fix a problem, or aggressively challenge the CEO's pet project, they get penalized.
They are put on a performance improvement plan for not being a team player.
It is institutional cognitive dissonance. Corporations want the fruits of rebellion without the discomfort of the rebellion itself.
They want the Formula One car to win the Grand Prix, but they also demand it have the smooth, quiet ride of a luxury sedan. It is an engineering impossibility.
The source material is basically urging you to stop searching for unicorns. Accept that extreme talent comes with extreme edges and build your management structures to either absorb that friction or explicitly reject it.
Exactly. You have to choose what you value more.
Okay, so we have explored how this cognitive architecture operates in isolation, like with Kipchoge, and how it clashes with bureaucratic hierarchy, like Boyd.
But the text actually pulls back the lens even further.
It really does. It moves from military history to the broader canvas of human innovation, and it posits something even more extreme.
It suggests that this inability to conform to social rules is inextricably linked to an inability to conform to reality itself.
Right, we are crossing the blurry line between visionary thinking and outright delusion.
This is where the neuropsychology becomes deeply fascinating. Consider what it takes to invent something that does not exist, or to completely redefine a scientific field.
The innovator must possess a fundamental belief that the impossible is, in fact, possible.
They must ignore the constraints of current reality to build the future. But a brain that is highly trained to ignore the constraints of reality does not always know where to draw the line.
And the examples the text uses to illustrate this are stunning. They force you to rethink historical icons entirely. Take Isaac Newton.
Widely considered one of the most brilliant intellects in human history.
Right. He formalized the laws of motion and universal gravitation. He invented calculus, just an absolute titan of reason.
But there's a huge catch.
A massive one. Centuries later, the famous economist John Maynard Keynes acquired a massive collection of Newton's private, unpublished papers at an auction.
These documents had been hidden away at Cambridge for a long time.
Keynes opens these trunks, presumably expecting to find, undiscovered mathematical proofs or physics equations.
But instead, he finds over 100,000 words that Newton wrote on alchemy, on magic,
on the search for the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. It's wild.
Keynes reviewed the documents and concluded they were wholly magical and completely devoid of scientific value. He actually called Newton not the first of the Age of Reason, but the last of the magicians.
But rather than viewing this as just some bizarre side hobby, we have to analyze the neurological link. How does the mind that figures out gravity also obsess over magic potions?
Well, think about the nature of gravity itself. In the 17th century, the idea that massive celestial bodies pull on each other across millions of miles of empty space without physically touching.
That would have sounded like magic.
It was an entirely absurd, magical concept to the scientific establishment of the time. To conceptualize gravity, Newton's brain had to be uniquely open to the idea of invisible, seemingly impossible forces governing the universe.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
He possessed a hyperdivergent intellect that did not filter out absurdities the way a normal brain does.
So that exact same lack of a cognitive filter, the willingness to entertain invisible forces, is what allowed him to spend years experimenting with alchemy.
You do not get the theory of gravity without a brain that is also highly susceptible to magical thinking.
The lack of a filter is the key. They don't have the governor that tells them an idea has gone too far.
And you see this exact same lack of a governor in behavioral aggression, too.
Yes, the text brings up General George Patton. Patton was the commander of the U.S. Third Army during World War II, a man whose sheer aggression and relentless forward momentum were instrumental in defeating Nazi Germany.
But that aggression was not a switch he could turn off.
Exactly. After the war, Patton is at a diplomatic function, and he meets his Russian counterpart. Through an interpreter, the Russian general proposes a toast.
And what does Patton do?
Patton looks at the interpreter and says, "Tell him I do not care to drink with him or any other Russian son of a bitch."
Which is just a statement of profound diplomatic recklessness that could have triggered international incidents in an already tense post-war environment.
The interpreter is horrified and refuses to translate it, but Patton insists.
So the Russian general eventually gets the translation, looks at Patton, and says he thinks Patton is also a son of a bitch.
And Patton's reaction. He laughs hysterically, raises his glass, and says, "Now that's something I can drink to, from one son of a bitch to another."
It's just wild. Patton's neurological baseline was permanently set to combat. His threat detection and response mechanisms were hyperactive.
In a theater of war, an aggressive, instantly combative mindset that does not hesitate or defer to pleasantries is exactly what keeps an army moving forward.
He viewed every interaction as a dominant submissive conflict. But when you remove the war, you cannot simply remove the combat-optimized architecture of the general's brain.
Right. He applies the exact same blunt force aggression to a delicate diplomatic dinner that he applied to a tank battle in the Ardennes.
It is the Formula One car again. He brought a war machine to a dinner party.
And this lack of a behavioral and conceptual governor is incredibly visible in modern business icons, too. You see it in Steve Jobs.
Oh, absolutely. His reality distortion field allowed him to conceptualize devices that didn't exist, but also made him a notoriously cruel and manipulative manager.
You see it in Walt Disney, whose imagination built an empire, but whose absolute refusal to compromise on his vision repeatedly pushed his company to the very brink of financial ruin.
And then there's the ultimate contemporary example, Elon Musk.
Musk is perhaps the most potent, observable case study of this phenomenon alive today, because the public gets to watch the extreme outputs and the extreme friction play out in real time on a global stage.
Exactly. Let's look at the sheer delusional audacity required to be Elon Musk. Think about the risk profile of his brain.
2 decades ago, he decides he's going to take on the entrenched, monopolistic automotive industry, the massive fossil fuel industry, and the aerospace defense contractors, all at the exact same time.
The objective probability of an individual succeeding at building a mass-market electric car company and a viable private rocket company simultaneously is statistically indistinguishable from zero.
A rational, well-adjusted brain looks at those odds and says, "This is a suicide mission. I will lose all my money."
Because a normal brain has a highly calibrated risk aversion mechanism designed to prevent financial and social ruin, Musk's neurobiology appears to completely lack that specific inhibitory response.
He perceives risk, but it does not deter his action in the way it deters the general population.
But the public loves the outcome of that risk blindness. They love the reusable rockets landing vertically. They love the transition to electric vehicles.
What they cannot stand is that the exact same mind that is blind to the risks of taking on NASA is also completely blind to the social risks of his public behavior.
This is a man who casually proposes dropping thermonuclear weapons on the poles of Mars to terraform it.
He genuinely argues there is a high probability humanity is living in a stimulated video game.
He publicly promises to solve a municipal water crisis while attempting to build a submarine to save kids in a cave, while simultaneously moving his desk to sleep on the floor of a factory tent because his car production line is failing.
The whiplash the public experiences is a result of their own flawed expectations. Society wants to consume the technological miracles generated by his hyper-divergent, risk-blind cognitive architecture.
But they are constantly outraged when he applies that exact same unfiltered, impulsive architecture to his social media presence.
You cannot have a brain that fundamentally believes the laws of the automotive industry do not apply to it, but perfectly believes the laws of public relations do. The delusion required to attempt the impossible bleeds into his everyday reality.
But this raises a major psychological question, doesn't it?
Yeah, why can't they self-correct? Why can't someone like Musk or Patton or Disney achieve a monumental level of success, look at their bank account or their medals, realize they have won the game, and then consciously dial back the mania?
Why can't they install a psychological governor after the fact?
Exactly. Why not just enjoy the win?
To understand why they do not self-correct, you have to understand the statistical and behavioral concept of reversion to the mean.
Reversion to the mean. Okay, explain that.
In statistics, extreme events or extreme outliers tend to be followed by more normal, average events over time. In human behavior, this usually manifests as a negative feedback loop.
So like an entrepreneur takes a massive risk, succeeds, makes $50 million, and then their risk appetite resorts to the mean.
Right, they become conservative, they want to protect their wealth, so they stop making wild bets, they buy a golf course and retire.
The system stabilizes.
Correct. But the wild minds we are analyzing actively defy reversion to the mean. The text quotes the Austrian novelist Stefan Zweig, who observed, "History reveals no instances of a conqueror being surfeited by conquests."
Meaning, a true conqueror never reaches a point where they are satisfied by the act of conquering.
They never look around and say, that's enough.
Never. Because the neurochemical reward they are chasing is not the money or the stability or the peace.
The reward is the act of pushing past the boundary itself. The determination, the obsessive optimism, the absolute refusal to accept constraints, the traits that push them to the absolute pinnacle of human achievement are a permanent state of being.
Because they lack the governor that tells a normal person to stop and enjoy the spoils.
And those exact same traits drastically increase the odds that they will eventually push themselves right over the edge into catastrophe. They literally do not possess the psychological brakes required to stop the vehicle.
The vision that builds the empire and the delusion that eventually threatens it are generated by the exact same engine.
That makes so much sense of why so many visionary companies eventually face massive internal crises caused by their founders.
When you are evaluating leaders or deciding which founder to invest in, you have to accept this reality. Demanding a visionary who is also perfectly rational, deeply cautious, and highly emotionally intelligent is asking for an oxymoron.
It is an impossible biological combination. It demands an individual who operates entirely at the extremes of the bell curve in divergent thinking, while simultaneously operating perfectly in the dead center of the bell curve for social conformity.
Which just does not exist in nature.
Not at all.
Which honestly makes me look at the entire leadership and business publishing industry with a lot of skepticism. Go to an airport bookstore right now.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
You're surrounded by hundreds of books promising that you can be an industry-disrupting innovator, build a billion-dollar company, and still be a perfectly balanced, mindful, Zen-like leader who eats dinner with their kids every night at 6:00 p.m. and never offends an employee.
It feels like this chapter completely detonates that narrative.
It absolutely dismantles it. The modern business literature you are referring to is largely selling a sanitized post hoc narrative. It is highly curated fiction.
Biographers and leadership gurus look at the successful output, the iPhone, the electric car, the championship trophy, and they retroactively assign conventional, palatable virtues to the process that created it.
They ignore the chaos, the mania, the destroyed relationships, and the deep psychological imbalance that actually fueled the achievement.
Because chaos does not sell well to middle management. The source material is forcing you to confront the unsanitized reality of what extreme greatness actually requires.
So let's synthesize this. Let's bring this down to the ground level for you, the listener.
Because you are likely not trying to build a colony on Mars, and you probably aren't trying to rewrite the laws of physics.
Right. You are trying to navigate your own career, lead your team effectively, and figure out what level of ambition is right for you. How do you take this profound reality that extreme talent is an inseparable, often agonizing package deal and actually apply it to your life?
The most powerful, actionable synthesis of this entire concept comes from a framework proposed by the entrepreneur Naval Ravikant, which the chapter references.
Naval's framework is brilliant here.
It really is. He addresses the fundamental human emotion of envy. As you navigate your career, you are inevitably going to look at highly successful people and feel jealous.
You look at someone who has achieved the wealth, the status, or the creative freedom you desire, and you covet their position.
But Ravikant points out that our envy is intellectually lazy.
Because we only envy the outputs, we cherry pick.
Precisely. You commit a massive cognitive error. You look at Elon Musk and you say, I want his billions and his influence. But subconsciously, you assume you get to keep your own low-stress weekends, your stable marriage, and your ability to sleep deeply without waking up in a cold sweat about a failing rocket valve.
You want to extract the pearl and leave the oyster.
Ravikant argues that true logical comparison requires what he calls the 100% swap rule.
The 100% swap rule, explain how that works in practice.
It forces a brutal internal audit. You cannot just swap bank accounts or job titles. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to execute a wholesale 247 100% swap with who that person is?
Oh, wow.
You have to take their neurochemistry, you have to take their paranoias, their childhood traumas, their inability to connect with their children, the crushing public scrutiny they endure, their distorted sense of reality, and their absolute inability to ever feel contentment.
If you are not willing to inherit their internal torment and the external friction they generate, then you have no logical right to be jealous of their external rewards.
That is incredibly profound. It is the ultimate cure for the modern psychological disease of Instagram jealousy.
We live in an era where we are constantly bombarded with the curated highlight reels of visionary success. We see the IPO bell being rung, we see the gold medal placed around the neck, we see the pristine magazine covers.
We almost never see the late-night panic attacks, the estrangement from family, or the biological inability to just sit quietly on a beach and feel happy.
We want the highlight reel. But this entire deep dive proves that the unique minds capable of producing those highlights are an inseparable package deal.
If you want the historic innovation, you have to accept the alchemy and the madness. You cannot just order the aspects of genius you find convenient.
It demands a rigorous level of self-reflection about your own desires. When you look at your idols, analyze the full spectrum of their existence, understand the psychological and biological burdens they carry to maintain that level of output.
When you apply the 100% swap rule, for the vast majority of people, the honest answer is a resounding no.
Most people, when faced with the full reality of a wild mind, would immediately reject the trade. And there is immense, profound peace to be found in acknowledging that no.
It is entirely liberating. It frees you from the crushing expectation that you were supposed to have it all.
It allows you to look at your own ordinary traits, your desire for a quiet weekend, your ability to empathize with your coworkers, your satisfaction with a job well done. Not as flaws holding you back from becoming the next Steve Jobs, but as the exact mechanisms that keep you sane and grounded.
You might not invent a revolutionary piece of technology, but you also are highly unlikely to verbally abuse your staff in an elevator or burn down your own life in pursuit of an impossible goal.
That is not a failure. That is a highly rational and probably vastly healthier biological trade-off.
Which leads to a final lingering thought I want you, the listener, to carefully consider as you integrate this framework into your life.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this time establishing that the individuals who violently push the world forward are inherently unbalanced, obsessive, and psychologically extreme. If that is a historical and biological reality, then perhaps we need to critically rethink our modern cultural obsession with work-life balance.
Oh, that's a spicy take.
Seeking perfect balance in your life is a noble, healthy, and deeply rewarding pursuit. But if you are actively striving for total equilibrium, if you are optimizing for peace, health, and social harmony, you might need to completely forgive yourself for not achieving world-altering greatness.
Because true, paradigm-shifting greatness, historically and mechanically, requires a wild, deeply unbalanced mind.
You cannot be perfectly centered and simultaneously operate at the absolute bleeding edge of human capability. You must make a conscious choice about where on the spectrum of chaos and achievement you actually want to exist.
That is a truth that is going to stick with you long after this is over. We are all chasing the myth of the perfectly balanced visionary, and it turns out it is a biological illusion. You truly do have to choose your heart.
You really do.
Well, you've navigated the chaotic realities of wild minds today, but how prepared are you to deal with the chaos of wild data? Because next time, we are going to dive into why people don't actually want accuracy when looking at numbers. What they truly crave is certainty.
And we will unpack exactly how that specific psychological craving leads to some of the most catastrophic mistakes in business and history.
Keep rigorously questioning your assumptions. Remember that the architecture of extreme success is always going to be built on an unstable foundation, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.